Silence guards the oldest nightmares more fiercely than armies. Every forgotten relic whispers evidence nobody expected, while impossible discoveries keep defying reason without mercy. Each revelation fractures comfortable beliefs, inviting disbelief instead of answers. Stay close, because every passing moment pulls another impossible secret from humanity's darkest, untouched memory, waiting silently. A cold wind moves across the fjords of southern Greenland, brushing against steep cliffs, quiet inlets, and grassy valleys that seem almost untouched by time. Scattered across this rugged landscape lie the remains of stone churches, collapsed farmhouses, and weathered walls that once echoed with the sounds of daily life. These ruins are modest, built from local rock and turf, yet they stand as silent witnesses to one of medieval Europe's greatest mysteries. For centuries, families lived here at the very edge of the known world. Then, without leaving a clear final chapter, they disappeared. The story began around AD 985, when Eric the Red led Norse settlers from Iceland to Greenland after his exile. Hoping that the inviting name Greenland would attract new colonists, he established what became known as the Eastern Settlement, followed later by the smaller Western Settlement farther north. At their height, these communities may have supported several thousand people. They built churches, raised cattle and sheep, hunted seals, traded valuable walrus ivory with Europe, and maintained connections with Norway for generations. For hundreds of years, these settlements appeared remarkably stable despite their isolation. Archaeological excavations have uncovered churches with carved stone crosses, carefully constructed homes, imported iron tools, and even fragments of stained glass from Europe. The Greenland Norse were not forgotten pioneers struggling alone. They remained part of medieval Christendom, paying tithes, recognizing bishops, and participating in long-distance trade that linked them to distant ports across the North Atlantic. Yet, sometime during the 14th and early 15th centuries, something changed. The Western settlement seems to have been abandoned first. A medieval Icelandic account describes arriving there only to find empty farms, wandering livestock, and complete silence. No battlefields, no burned villages, no mass graves were reported. It was as though an entire community had simply faded away. The Eastern settlement survived longer, but by the early 1400s, written records became increasingly scarce. The last widely accepted historical document records a wedding held at Valsey Church in AD 1408. The stone church still stands today, remarkably preserved against Greenland's harsh climate. After that ceremony, the documentary trail ends. Ships continued to arrive occasionally, but eventually they found only abandoned buildings and deserted fields. Climate has long been considered the leading explanation. During the period known as the Little Ice Age, temperatures gradually cooled across the North Atlantic. Shorter growing seasons, expanding sea ice, and increasingly dangerous sailing conditions would have made farming and trade far more difficult. Livestock struggled, harvests declined, and contact with Europe became less reliable. Economic changes may have compounded these hardships. Walrus ivory, once highly prized throughout Europe, gradually lost value as elephant ivory from Africa became more available through expanding trade routes. Without profitable exports, maintaining regular voyages to Greenland became increasingly difficult. Isolation deepened with every passing decade. Some researchers believe the Norse simply adapted too slowly. They relied heavily on European farming traditions despite living in an Arctic environment where marine resources offered greater security. Archaeological evidence suggests they hunted seals extensively, especially in later centuries, but perhaps not enough to compensate for failing agriculture. Others argue that this picture underestimates their resilience. pointing to evidence that they successfully adjusted their diet and survived for centuries under worsening conditions. Interaction with the Inuit adds another layer to the mystery. The ancestors of today's Inuit expanded into Greenland, while the Norse settlements still existed. Norse artifacts have been discovered at Inuit sites, while Inuit tools occasionally appear in Norse contexts, suggesting at least some degree of contact. Was this relationship peaceful, based on trade and shared knowledge? Did competition for resources create tension? Medieval European accounts mention encounters, but they are fragmentary and often shaped by distant observers who never visited Greenland themselves. Other possibilities remain difficult to test. Some speculate that disease spread through the isolated communities, leaving too few survivors to sustain the settlements. Others imagine gradual migration rather than sudden disappearance, with families quietly returning to Iceland or Norway over several generations. More unconventional theories suggest undocumented voyages carried survivors elsewhere across the Atlantic, leaving little trace behind. None of these ideas has produced decisive evidence, yet each attempts to explain the same haunting silence. Today, the churches still overlook empty valleys where cattle once grazed, and bells may once have echoed across the fjords. The stones remain exactly where medieval builders placed them, enduring storms that erase the voices of those who raised them. Their disappearance was not marked by a single catastrophe, but by an absence, a mystery preserved not through dramatic ruins, but through the quiet persistence of a landscape still waiting to reveal what truly became of Greenland's lost Norse colonies. As the silence of Greenland's abandoned churches fades into the distance, another mystery emerges, not carved into weathered stone, but captured within fragile pages. Instead of deserted settlements overlooking frozen fjords, we now enter the dim light of an old library, where a single manuscript has resisted understanding for centuries. Here, the disappearance is not of a people, but of an identity. Someone devoted years to creating one of history's most perplexing books, then seemingly vanished from the historical record, leaving behind only questions written in ink. The manuscript itself is modest in size, bound in worn vellum that has survived remarkable journeys through time. Its pages are filled with flowing script unlike any known alphabet, accompanied by illustrations of unfamiliar plants, mysterious circular diagrams, bathing women surrounded by intricate networks of green and blue tubes, and astronomical images that appear both familiar and strangely distorted. Nothing seems entirely random, yet nothing fits comfortably within established knowledge. Every page invites examination, while quietly refusing explanation. Today, the book is known as the Voynich Manuscript, named after rare book dealer Wilfrid Voynich, who acquired it in 1912 from a Jesuit college in Italy. Yet the manuscript itself is far older. Radiocarbon dating places the vellum between AD 1404 and 1438, suggesting it originated during the early 15th century. The ink, pigments, and writing style are also consistent with medieval craftsmanship, making it unlikely that the manuscript is a modern forgery. Whatever it represents, it emerged from a genuine historical world. Its earliest confirmed history remains frustratingly incomplete. At some point during the 17th century, the manuscript belonged to Georg Beresch, an alchemist living in Prague. Unable to decipher it, he sought help from the Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher, one of Europe's most celebrated polymaths. After Beresch's death, the manuscript eventually reached Kircher himself, where it disappeared into archives until its rediscovery centuries later. The path it traveled before arriving in Prague, however, remains almost entirely unknown. That uncertainty has naturally led to an even deeper question: who actually wrote it? One frequently discussed candidate is Roger Bacon, the 13th century English philosopher and Franciscan friar. Early owners believed the manuscript might have been his work, partly because Bacon was known for his scientific curiosity and experimental thinking. However, radiocarbon dating largely rules out this possibility, placing the manuscript's creation more than a century after Bacon's lifetime. Still, his name continues to appear whenever the manuscript's origins are debated, reflecting how powerfully legends can outlive evidence. Attention has also turned toward figures connected to Renaissance courts, particularly in northern Italy and Central Europe. Some researchers propose that the manuscript was produced by an unknown physician or herbalist compiling medical knowledge in a deliberately concealed script. Others suggest it may have been created within circles interested in astrology, alchemy, or natural philosophy, where secrecy often surrounded specialized knowledge. If the text contains practical information, perhaps its author intentionally disguised it to protect valuable discoveries or restrict access to trusted readers. Yet, despite decades of study, no convincing translation has emerged. Professional cryptographers, linguists, computer scientists, and artificial intelligence systems have all attempted to unlock its language. During the Second World War, some of the world's leading codebreakers examined the manuscript without success. Statistical analyses reveal intriguing patterns. The script behaves much like natural language, displaying consistent word frequencies, grammatical structures, and recurring combinations that appear too organized to be meaningless. At the same time, no known language has matched its vocabulary or syntax convincingly. This has encouraged alternative possibilities. Perhaps the writing represents an invented language designed by a single individual. Medieval scholars occasionally experimented with universal alphabets and symbolic systems intended to express hidden philosophical ideas. Could the Voynich manuscript preserve one such forgotten intellectual experiment? Or does it encode an existing language through an exceptionally sophisticated cipher, one still resistant to every modern decoding technique? Others remain unconvinced that any hidden message exists at all. They argue the manuscript may be an elaborate fabrication, created to impress wealthy collectors or patrons fascinated by mysterious knowledge. If so, its author possessed extraordinary patience and artistic discipline. Producing hundreds of pages filled with consistent script and detailed illustrations would have required immense effort for a deception whose purpose remains equally mysterious. Some of the manuscript's imagery has inspired even more speculative interpretations. The unfamiliar botanical illustrations rarely correspond perfectly with identifiable species. The astronomical diagrams contain recognizable celestial themes, yet arranged in unusual ways. The interconnected bathing figures have been interpreted as symbolic representations of medicine, fertility, cosmology, or spiritual transformation. A few have even suggested the manuscript preserves knowledge inherited from an otherwise forgotten tradition, though no supporting evidence has confirmed such ideas. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether the manuscript can eventually be translated, but whether its anonymous creator expected anyone outside a small circle to understand it at all. Was the true audience a patron, a secret society, a student, or simply the author alone? If the key to its language once existed, did it disappear with the person who created it? The vellum pages remain remarkably well preserved, their ink still as confident as the day it dried centuries ago. Every careful stroke suggests intention. Every illustration hints at meaning just beyond reach. Somewhere behind those elegant symbols stands an individual whose name, voice, and purpose have dissolved into history, leaving only a manuscript that continues to guard its creator's identity with unwavering silence. If the Voynich manuscript reminds us that a single anonymous author can leave behind centuries of unanswered questions, the next mystery unfolds on a far greater scale. Instead of silent pages hidden inside a library, we step onto the crowded docks of imperial China, where fleets of colossal ships once departed with astonishing precision. Their destinations are largely known. Their achievements are well documented. Yet, their true purpose remains one of history's most enduring puzzles. Morning mist drifts across the wide waters of the Yangtze River as rows of towering wooden vessels prepare to leave the harbor. Their towering masts rise above warehouses stacked with porcelain, silk, lacquerware, and carefully packed tribute gifts. Sailors tighten ropes while officials record cargo with meticulous detail. Bronze bells ring across the waterfront, and enormous rudders shift slowly as the fleet catches the first favorable wind. It is a display of wealth and organization unlike anything the medieval world had ever witnessed. During the early 15th century, under the rule of the Yongle Emperor of the Ming Dynasty, China launched a series of remarkable maritime expeditions led by the Admiral Zheng He. Between AD 1405 and 1433, 7 major voyages carried thousands of sailors, soldiers, interpreters, diplomats, physicians, craftsmen, and merchants across Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, Arabia, and the eastern coast of Africa. Contemporary records describe fleets numbering hundreds of vessels, although historians continue to debate the exact size of the largest ships. Even conservative estimates suggest these expeditions ranked among the greatest maritime enterprises ever organized before the modern age. Exotic animals returned to China, including giraffes and zebras, while foreign rulers sent ambassadors bearing tribute to the Ming court. Detailed navigational knowledge expanded, diplomatic relationships flourished, and Chinese prestige reached distant shores. On the surface, the purpose appears straightforward. Official Ming records portray the voyages as diplomatic missions intended to display imperial authority, establish tributary relationships, suppress piracy, and promote peaceful trade. The Yongle Emperor had seized the throne after a civil war, and projecting strength across international waters reinforced both his domestic legitimacy and China's influence abroad. Grand displays of power often served political purposes as much as economic ones. Yet, many historians believe this explanation tells only part of the story. The enormous expense of these expeditions raises difficult questions. Constructing massive fleets, supplying tens of thousands of personnel, and maintaining years-long voyages demanded extraordinary resources. The material profits generated through tribute and commerce seem insufficient to justify such investment alone. Why would an empire devote so much energy to missions that produced relatively modest economic returns? One possibility points toward intelligence gathering. Every port visited offered opportunities to collect information about distant kingdoms, trade networks, political alliances, and military capabilities. Long before modern diplomacy established permanent embassies, these voyages may have functioned as vast reconnaissance missions, allowing the Ming court to better understand an interconnected world extending far beyond China's immediate borders. Others suggest that the expeditions carried a more personal objective connected to the emperor himself. According to several historical traditions, the Yongle Emperor remained deeply concerned about the fate of his nephew, the Jianwen Emperor, whom he had overthrown during the conflict that secured his own rule. Rumors persisted that the defeated emperor had escaped rather than perished. Some later accounts speculate that Zheng He's fleets quietly searched foreign lands for evidence of the missing ruler. While surviving official records never confirm such a mission, the possibility has continued to intrigue historians because it aligns with the political uncertainties surrounding Yongle's early reign. Religion may also have played a subtle role. Zheng He himself was born into a Muslim family before rising through the imperial court. His fleets visited important religious centers representing Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and other traditions. Temples received imperial gifts, sacred sites were documented, and diplomatic exchanges often included spiritual as well as political dimensions. Could the Voyages have sought not merely alliances, but a broader understanding of the religious landscape shaping the Indian Ocean world? Beyond established scholarship lie more speculative ideas that continue to capture public imagination. Some propose that the treasure fleets ventured far beyond their recorded destinations, perhaps reaching Australia or even the Americas decades before European explorers. These claims often cite disputed maps, controversial interpretations of archaeological finds, or isolated oral traditions. However, no widely accepted archaeological evidence has confirmed such extraordinary voyages, and most historians remain cautious about extending Zheng He's known routes beyond those supported by contemporary records. Another mystery surrounds the voyage's abrupt conclusion. After the seventh expedition, imperial priorities shifted dramatically. Political factions within the Ming government increasingly viewed the costly maritime expeditions as unnecessary. Resources were redirected toward defending China's northern frontiers, and official support for overseas exploration faded. Many ocean-going ships were dismantled or left to decay, while maritime activity became increasingly restricted. In later generations, portions of the official records themselves appear to have been lost, destroyed, or deliberately neglected. This disappearance of documentation has fueled endless speculation. Were ordinary bureaucratic changes responsible for the missing records, or did later officials intentionally minimize the achievements of policies they no longer supported? If additional logs, maps, or reports once existed, what details might they have contained? Today, scattered inscriptions, recovered shipwrecks, ancient ports, and surviving Ming chronicles preserve fragments of these extraordinary expeditions. Together, they reveal one of history's greatest demonstrations of maritime capability. Yet, they stop just short of explaining every motive that sent those immense fleets across the horizon. The ships returned, the emperor's ambitions faded, and the oceans slowly reclaimed their silence. But somewhere within the gaps left by incomplete records, the true purpose behind China's treasure fleets may still be waiting to surface once more. As the great treasure fleets disappeared from the oceans, another kind of treasure faced a quieter fate. This time, the cargo was not silk, porcelain, or rare spices, but knowledge itself. Instead of following ships across distant seas, we enter the fading light of Constantinople, where shelves once carried centuries of memory, and where one of history's most elusive disappearances may have occurred without a single witness recording its final moment. The corridors are lined with wooden cabinets darkened by age. Rolls of parchment rest beside carefully bound codices, while oil lamps cast a warm glow across faded Greek lettering. The scent of ink, leather, and beeswax lingers in the still air. Scribes quietly copy ancient texts with patient precision, preserving ideas first written hundreds, sometimes thousands, of years earlier. Outside, the walls of Constantinople stand against the growing uncertainty of the 15th century. Inside, every manuscript represents a fragile victory over time itself. For more than 1,000 years, Constantinople served as the intellectual heart of the Byzantine Empire. Founded by Emperor Constantine in AD 330, the city became a meeting place between Europe and Asia, where scholars preserved philosophy, theology, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and literature inherited from both the ancient Greek and Roman worlds. Countless works that might otherwise have disappeared survived because generations of Byzantine scribes continued copying them long after the Western Roman Empire had fallen. Among the institutions devoted to this mission was the Imperial Library of Constantinople, traditionally believed to have been established during the reign of Constantius II in the 4th century. Although its exact organization changed over the centuries, Historical sources describe collections of manuscripts maintained within imperial and religious institutions. Fires, political upheavals, and periods of decline repeatedly threatened these collections. Yet, the city's scholars continued rebuilding and preserving what they could. By the 15th century, however, the Byzantine Empire had been reduced to little more than its capital. The magnificent city that once ruled vast territories now stood isolated, surrounded by rising powers and increasingly dependent on fading resources. Within its monasteries, churches, and palaces remained manuscripts copied across centuries, many of them unique. Then came AD 1453. As Sultan Mehmed II prepared for the siege of Constantinople, enormous cannons pounded the ancient walls for weeks. The final assault ended more than a millennium of Byzantine rule, transforming the city forever. The conquest itself is well documented. What remains uncertain is the fate of many of the books that once filled its libraries. Some undoubtedly survived. Long before the city's fall, Byzantine scholars had begun traveling westward, carrying precious manuscripts into Italy and other parts of Europe. Their arrival contributed significantly to the intellectual movement now known as the Renaissance. Works by Plato, Aristotle, Sophocles, and numerous other classical authors reached new audiences, partly because dedicated scholars transported copies before the city's final collapse. Yet, these rescued manuscripts almost certainly represented only a fraction of what once existed. Historical references mention texts that no longer survive, including historical chronicles, scientific treatises, theological commentaries, and literary works known only through quotations and other writings. Were these volumes destroyed during earlier fires? Did they disappear gradually through centuries of neglect? Or did some remain inside Constantinople until the final days of the siege? Accounts from the conquest vary considerably. Some describe widespread looting during the city's capture, when soldiers entered churches, monasteries, and private homes in search of valuables. Books, especially richly decorated manuscripts, may have been taken alongside precious metal objects. Others suggest that many libraries had already declined long before 1453, leaving fewer collections than later legends imagined. The absence of detailed inventories makes it difficult to determine exactly what existed when the city finally fell. This uncertainty has opened the door to enduring speculation. Could hidden storerooms have escaped destruction entirely? Throughout Constantinople, monasteries contained underground chambers, sealed vaults, and forgotten passages constructed over centuries. Some researchers have wondered whether monks concealed especially valuable manuscripts before the siege reached its climax, hoping to recover them later. If such hiding places existed, were they ever rediscovered? Others point toward private collections. Wealthy scholars, noble families, and church officials often maintained personal libraries independent of imperial institutions. During the chaos of conquest, individual manuscripts could easily have changed hands, been carried abroad anonymously, or disappeared into collections whose histories were never recorded. A single, unidentified codex resting unnoticed in a monastery or archive today might preserve knowledge believed lost for centuries. More speculative theories extend even further. Some imagine secret repositories containing works of ancient philosophers whose writings survive only in fragments. Others suggest forgotten scientific observations, alternative historical accounts, or theological texts deemed too controversial for widespread circulation. While no evidence confirms such hidden collections, the sheer number of known lost works makes the possibility difficult to dismiss entirely. The mystery is deepened by what has already been found. From time to time, manuscripts long believed missing have unexpectedly surfaced in monasteries, private collections, or neglected archives. Each discovery serves as a reminder that history's libraries have never been fully mapped. Entire texts have survived simply because one careful copy escaped destruction at precisely the right moment. Today, the skyline of modern Istanbul rises where Constantinople once stood, its streets layered above countless centuries of forgotten foundations. Somewhere beneath those stones, or perhaps on the shelves of distant libraries whose contents remain only partially catalogued, there may still rest pages that once belonged to Byzantium's vanished world. Until every forgotten archive is opened and every overlooked manuscript is read, the final fate of Constantinople's lost library remains suspended between history and possibility, inviting us to wonder how much of the ancient world may still be waiting in silence. If forgotten manuscripts may still lie hidden in silent vaults, then perhaps other treasures disappeared just as quietly. Not every loss from Constantinople was written on parchment. Some were forged from gold, crowned with emeralds, pearls, and sapphires, carrying not only immense wealth but the authority of an empire itself. Their absence has become another unanswered chapter, one in which symbols of imperial power faded into history with almost no trace. Imagine entering the ceremonial halls of the Great Palace of Constantinople during the height of the Byzantine Empire. Sunlight filters through tall windows, striking polished marble floors that reflect flashes of gold. Silk banners sway gently above assembled courtiers, while incense drifts through the vast chamber. At its center stands the emperor, clothed in deep purple robes embroidered with gold thread. Upon his head rests a magnificent crown, shimmering with pearls gathered from distant seas and gemstones carried across continents. More than an ornament, it represents divine authority, imperial continuity, and the unbroken legacy of Rome itself. The Byzantine emperors inherited far more than a throne. They considered themselves the rightful successors of the Roman Caesars, preserving an imperial tradition that stretched back for centuries. Their regalia reflected that extraordinary claim. Crowns, ceremonial pendants, jeweled belts, scepters, globes, and richly decorated robes were crafted not simply as displays of wealth, but as sacred objects used during coronations, religious ceremonies, diplomatic receptions, and public processions. Historical descriptions portray these treasures in remarkable detail. Court writers admired crowns adorned with suspended pearl strands that gently moved as the emperor walked. Golden diadems sparkled beneath candlelight inside Hagia Sophia during elaborate coronation ceremonies. Precious icons, reliquaries, and ceremonial crosses accompanied the imperial regalia, reinforcing the close relationship between political authority and religious devotion within Byzantine society. Yet, despite the prominence of these objects, surprisingly little survives today. Unlike many medieval kingdoms whose royal regalia remain preserved in museums or cathedrals, the ceremonial treasures of Byzantium largely disappeared. Only scattered fragments, artistic depictions, written inventories, and a handful of surviving artifacts offer clues to what once existed. The fate of the most important imperial jewels remains uncertain. Their disappearance spread across centuries of political upheaval rather than a single catastrophic event. The mystery begins well before the fall of Constantinople. Throughout Byzantine history, imperial treasures were repeatedly threatened by civil wars, palace conspiracies, foreign invasions, and financial crises. During periods of instability, valuable objects were occasionally melted down to finance military campaigns or pay invading armies. Gold could become coins. Jewels could be removed and reset into new ceremonial objects. Every crisis placed immense pressure on the imperial treasury. One of the greatest disruptions came during the Fourth Crusade in AD 1204. Instead of reaching the Holy Land, Crusader armies captured Constantinople itself. For 3 devastating days, churches, palaces, and imperial buildings were looted on an extraordinary scale. Contemporary accounts describe treasures carried away by soldiers, merchants, and nobles from Western Europe. Many religious relics known today in European cathedrals can be traced directly to this event. It seems almost certain that portions of the imperial regalia disappeared during the same period. Yet, records remain frustratingly incomplete. Some ceremonial objects may have been dismantled immediately for their precious metals and gemstones. Others could have entered private collections, where their origins were gradually forgotten. A jeweled clasp removed from an imperial crown might later appear as decoration on another royal object hundreds of miles away, its Byzantine identity completely erased. When the Byzantines recaptured Constantinople in AD 1261, they regained a city stripped of much of its former wealth. Even so, new emperors continued using ceremonial regalia, suggesting that at least part of the imperial collection had survived or been recreated. But whether these later crowns preserved earlier traditions or represented entirely new creations remains uncertain. The final chapter unfolded nearly 2 centuries later during the Ottoman conquest of AD 1453. As the city's defenses collapsed, enormous quantities of wealth disappeared amid the confusion of siege and conquest. Contemporary sources describe treasures seized from palaces and churches, yet surprisingly few offer detailed descriptions of the imperial regalia itself. Had the crowns already been hidden? Were they destroyed to prevent capture? Did trusted officials attempt to smuggle them beyond the city's walls during its final days? Some historians believe many of the jewels were simply absorbed into the Ottoman treasury, where gemstones and precious metals could easily be reused for new works of art. Throughout history, royal ornaments have often been dismantled, their individual components surviving while the original masterpieces disappear forever. Others suggest that at least a portion of the regalia may never have reached the conquerors at all. Legends tell of loyal courtiers hiding imperial treasures within sealed chambers beneath palaces, monasteries, or forgotten cisterns beneath the ancient city. Constantinople possessed an astonishing network of underground spaces built over many centuries. While no confirmed cache of Byzantine crown jewels has ever been discovered, archaeological exploration beneath modern Istanbul continues to reveal unexpected structures that remained unknown for generations. There are also persistent stories that members of the imperial household escaped carrying sacred regalia into exile, hoping one day to restore the empire. Such accounts remain difficult to verify, yet they reflect the symbolic importance these objects held. The loss of the crown was never simply the loss of gold. It represented the disappearance of an empire's visible identity. Today, mosaics, illuminated manuscripts, and carved ivory panels preserve images of emperors wearing crowns that no longer exist. They offer glimpses of treasures whose brilliance survives only in art and memory. Somewhere, perhaps hidden beneath layers of forgotten architecture, dispersed among anonymous collections, or transformed into entirely different creations, fragments of those imperial jewels may still endure. Until unmistakable evidence emerges, the missing crown jewels of Byzantium remain suspended between documented history and enduring legend, quietly reminding us that even the greatest symbols of power can disappear without leaving a final trace. The missing crown jewels of Byzantium remind us that even the grandest symbols of empire can disappear almost without a trace. Yet crowns were not the only imperial treasures to slip beyond history's reach. Far to the east, another empire witnessed the quiet disappearance of objects no less extraordinary. This time, they were not worn by emperors, they carried them across entire oceans. And somewhere between the harbors of Ming China and the distant horizons of the Indian Ocean, some of the greatest ships ever built simply faded from the historical record. At dawn, a thick veil of mist hangs over the harbor at Nanjing. Towering wooden hulls rise above the water like floating fortresses, their broad decks alive with activity. Sailors coil heavy ropes while carpenters inspect towering masts that stretch toward the pale morning sky. Silk banners flutter in the breeze as warehouses empty their cargo into the waiting fleet. Porcelain, lacquerware, bolts of silk, bronze coins, medicinal herbs, and ceremonial gifts disappear into the enormous vessels. With the tide slowly turning, drums echo across the waterfront, and one by one the treasure ships begin their long departure toward seas that few people in China would ever see. During the early 15th century, the Ming Dynasty assembled one of the most ambitious naval forces in history. Commanded by the Admiral Zheng He, the treasure fleets completed 7 remarkable expeditions between AD 1405 and 1433, visiting ports throughout Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and the eastern coast of Africa. Official chronicles describe hundreds of ships sailing together, carrying diplomats, soldiers, merchants, navigators, translators, physicians, astronomers, and craftsmen. It was an undertaking that demonstrated not only China's technological sophistication, but also its immense administrative power. Many of those voyages returned safely, bringing exotic animals, foreign ambassadors, rare goods, and valuable knowledge of distant kingdoms. Yet, not every vessel completed the journey home. Historical records occasionally mention ships damaged by violent storms, separated from the main fleet by powerful currents, or lost during hazardous passages through unfamiliar waters. The oceans crossed by the treasure fleets were among the busiest trade routes in the medieval world, but they were also capable of sudden violence. Monsoon winds could shift with astonishing force, reefs remained poorly charted, and pirates operated in several regions despite the fleet's military escorts. Surprisingly, however, detailed records concerning individual losses remain scarce. The official Ming chronicles focus primarily on diplomatic achievements rather than maritime disasters. Ships that disappeared may have received only brief mention, if they were recorded at all. Later, political changes within the Ming court further complicated the historical picture. As support for overseas expeditions declined, preserving exhaustive accounts of every voyage may have become a much lower priority. Some documents were neglected, while others appear to have disappeared entirely over the centuries. This absence of documentation has left historians with an intriguing question. What became of the ships that never returned? The most straightforward explanation is also the most probable. Some vessels likely sank during storms, taking their crews and cargo to the bottom of the Indian Ocean or the South China Sea. Maritime archaeology has recovered numerous shipwrecks from the Ming period, confirming that large trading vessels regularly crossed these waters. Yet, positively identifying a wreck as one of Zheng He's treasure ships remains extraordinarily difficult. Wooden hulls decay rapidly beneath tropical seas, and centuries of sediment often conceal what little survives. Another possibility is that some ships survive disasters only to reach unfamiliar shores. A vessel blown far off course might have sought refuge in an isolated harbor, where damaged timbers prevented its return to China. Could stranded crews have settled among local populations, gradually abandoning hopes of returning home? Maritime history contains many examples of shipwrecked sailors establishing unexpected communities far from their original destinations. Although no confirmed evidence links such settlements to Zheng He's fleets, the possibility remains within the realm of historical imagination. Some scholars have suggested that certain ships continued operating locally after official expeditions ended. Regional rulers may have acquired damaged Chinese vessels, adapting them for commercial use throughout the Indian Ocean. If so, portions of the Great Treasure Fleet may have lived on under different flags, their origins slowly forgotten as decades passed. The mystery becomes even deeper when considering the fate of the fleet itself after the final expedition. Following Zheng He's last voyage, Ming policy shifted dramatically. Court officials increasingly viewed overseas expeditions as expensive and unnecessary. Ocean-going shipbuilding declined, maritime restrictions expanded, and many official vessels were dismantled or left to deteriorate. Some historians believe usable ships were intentionally broken apart to discourage future expeditions. Others argue that many simply decayed naturally after years of demanding service. Yet, the enormous scale of the fleet has inspired more speculative theories. Some writers have proposed that isolated treasure ships ventured well beyond their documented routes, reaching distant coastlines never mentioned in surviving records. Others imagine hidden anchorages where damaged vessels remained abandoned for centuries before gradually disappearing beneath mangrove forests or coastal sediment. A handful of disputed artifacts and controversial maps have occasionally been presented as supporting evidence, but none has gained broad acceptance among historians. The available archaeological record continues to favor the documented voyages across the Indian Ocean rather than extraordinary, undocumented expeditions. Even so, the sea is an unreliable guardian of history. Entire fleets have rested unnoticed beneath the waves for centuries before modern technology revealed them. Advances in underwater archaeology continue to uncover forgotten harbors, ancient cargoes, and remarkably preserved wrecks once believed lost forever. Every new discovery reminds us that the oceans still conceal countless chapters waiting to be read. Today, the waters once crossed by Zheng He's fleets remain among the busiest shipping lanes on Earth. Modern vessels pass above depths where broken timbers, porcelain jars, bronze anchors, and weathered cargo may still rest in complete darkness somewhere beneath shifting currents. Fragments of the missing treasure ships could remain untouched, preserving silent evidence of voyages whose final destinations were never recorded. Until those waters surrender their secrets, the true fate of the Ming dynasty's missing treasure ships remains suspended between documented history and the vast, uncharted silence of the sea. As the missing treasure ships of the Ming dynasty disappear into the silence of the sea, another mystery begins along the rugged shores of medieval Europe. Once again, valuable objects seem to dissolve from history, leaving behind scattered clues instead of clear answers. But this time, the treasure was guarded not by imperial admirals, but by one of the most powerful and secretive military orders ever created, the Knights Templar. A gray dawn settles over the stone fortress of a Templar commandery. Narrow windows overlook quiet fields where mounted knights once trained beneath fluttering banners marked with the Red Cross. Inside thick-walled vaults, iron-bound chests stand beneath flickering torchlight. Ledgers record loans to kings. Sealed documents rest beside silver chalices, gold coins, jeweled reliquaries, and ceremonial swords carried across distant battlefields. Every corridor reflects discipline, wealth, and absolute confidence. Yet, within only a few years, nearly everything inside these walls will disappear, leaving historians to wonder what became of one of medieval Europe's greatest fortunes. The Knights Templar were founded around AD 1119, originally to protect Christian pilgrims traveling through the Holy Land. Over the following 2 centuries, the order evolved into far more than a military brotherhood. Supported by generous donations from European nobles and monarchs, the Templars accumulated castles, farmland, churches, ports, and an extensive financial network stretching across Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. They developed systems resembling early banking, allowing pilgrims and rulers to transfer wealth securely between distant regions. Their influence became enormous. By the beginning of the 14th century, the Templars possessed considerable property and financial resources. Their organization answered directly to the Pope rather than local rulers, giving them an unusual degree of independence. But power often attracts suspicion, especially during periods of political uncertainty. On Friday, October 13th, AD 1307, King Philip IV of France launched a coordinated operation against the order. Hundreds of Templars were arrested simultaneously, accused of heresy, blasphemy, and other serious crimes. Many historians believe the king's overwhelming debts to the Templars played a significant role in his decision, although the precise motivations remain debated. Under intense pressure, Pope Clement V eventually dissolved the order in AD 1312. What followed created one of history's most enduring mysteries. When royal officials searched Templar properties, they recovered lands, buildings, financial records, and various valuables. Yet, many expected to find far greater wealth than what was officially documented. Rumors quickly spread that the order's greatest treasure had vanished before the arrests began. One account has attracted particular attention for centuries. According to later traditions, shortly before the mass arrests in France, a small fleet of Templar ships quietly departed from the port of La Rochelle on the Atlantic coast. Contemporary records confirm that the Templars maintained facilities there, but the fate of any departing vessels remains uncertain. If ships did leave carrying valuables, where did they sail? No surviving document answers the question. Some historians caution that expectations surrounding the Templars' treasure may be exaggerated. Much of the order's wealth existed not as piles of gold, but as land, legal rights, agricultural income, and financial obligations recorded on parchment. Their economic power was substantial, yet perhaps less portable than later legends suggest. Even so, movable valuables certainly existed, including coins, religious objects, diplomatic correspondence, and precious relics accumulated over generations. Could these items have been hidden before the arrests? Several theories suggest that loyal members concealed important assets within remote castles, monastery vaults, or underground chambers beneath Templar commanderies. Across Europe, numerous medieval fortresses contained sealed rooms, forgotten wells, and blocked passageways that continue to inspire archaeological investigation. While occasional discoveries have fueled public fascination, no confirmed cache matching the legendary Templar treasure has ever been found. Other possibilities point toward escape rather than concealment. In Portugal, many former Templars joined the newly established Order of Christ, preserving elements of their organization under royal protection. In Scotland, legends claim surviving knights found refuge beyond the reach of French authorities. Similar traditions appear in parts of Spain and elsewhere in Europe, where isolated communities remembered mysterious arrivals carrying sacred objects or hidden wealth. Historical evidence for these stories varies considerably, yet they reflect the remarkable resilience of the Templars' reputation long after the order itself disappeared. Among the most speculative theories are those linking the Templars to extraordinary relics. Over the centuries, legends have claimed they secretly possessed the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, ancient manuscripts or sacred relics brought from Palestine during the Crusades. These stories have inspired countless books and films, but no reliable historical evidence confirms that such objects ever belonged to the order. Even so, the persistence of these legends reveals how deeply the mystery has entered the popular imagination. Perhaps the greatest puzzle lies not in the treasure itself, but in the remarkable silence surrounding its fate. Medieval Europe produced countless legal records, financial documents, and royal inventories, yet no definitive account explains where every movable asset of the order ultimately went. If hidden wealth existed, those entrusted with protecting it succeeded extraordinarily well. Today, ruined Templar castles stand quietly across Europe, their weathered walls overlooking forests, rivers, and forgotten roads once traveled by armored horsemen. Beneath cracked stone floors and collapsed towers, generations have searched for secret vaults that may never have existed, or perhaps have simply never been found. Whether the final survivors carried their greatest treasures into exile, concealed them within forgotten strongholds, or left behind nothing more than powerful legends, the mystery endures. Somewhere between documented history and centuries of whispered tradition, the lost treasure of the Knights Templar continues to wait, inviting each new generation to wonder whether its greatest secret remains undiscovered. As stories of the Knights Templar fade into ruined castles and forgotten vaults, another legend of missing wealth emerges from the heart of medieval Europe. Once again, history speaks of armies that marched through war carrying enormous riches, only for those treasures to dissolve into silence. This mystery does not begin with kings or emperors, but with a movement born from faith, rebellion, and one of the most turbulent conflicts of the 15th century. Morning fog clings to the rolling hills of Bohemia. Dense forests surround narrow valleys where wagon tracks disappear into ancient woodlands. The ruins of stone fortresses rise above quiet villages, their broken towers overlooking fields that have witnessed countless armies passing beneath them. Somewhere along these forgotten roads, according to generations of local tradition, wagons laden with gold, silver, sacred relics, and precious objects were hidden from pursuing enemies. Whether those stories preserve fragments of truth or echoes of centuries-old imagination remains one of Central Europe's enduring mysteries. The Hussite movement emerged during the early 15th century, following the execution of the Czech religious reformer Jan Hus in AD 1415. His death provoked widespread outrage across Bohemia and eventually ignited a series of conflicts known as the Hussite Wars, fought between Hussite forces and armies loyal to the Holy Roman Empire and the papacy. Over nearly 2 decades of warfare, the Hussites developed remarkably effective military tactics, most famously their heavily fortified wagon formations, which transformed ordinary supply wagons into mobile defensive strongholds. Despite facing repeated crusades launched against them, Hussite commanders achieved a series of surprising victories. Their armies captured towns, defeated larger forces, and seized military equipment, horses, supplies, and valuables during numerous campaigns. Like many medieval armies, they also acquired wealth through tribute, taxation, confiscated property, and the occupation of strategic territories. Over time, stories began to circulate that a significant portion of this accumulated wealth had never been recovered. Historical records confirm that the Hussite armies transported valuable goods throughout their campaigns. Wagon trains often carried military supplies alongside captured treasures, church valuables, coinage, and diplomatic gifts. During periods of rapid movement or impending defeat, commanders occasionally concealed supplies to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. Such practices were common in medieval warfare and provide a realistic foundation for later traditions. Yet, no surviving inventory clearly accounts for everything. As the Hussite Wars gradually came to an end, political divisions emerged within the movement itself. Different factions negotiated separate settlements, while military alliances shifted repeatedly. Amid this confusion, records became incomplete, and references to missing valuables began appearing in regional traditions. If hidden caches existed, their locations may have been known only to a handful of trusted commanders who never returned from battle. One of the names most frequently associated with these legends is Jan Žižka, the brilliant military leader whose innovative tactics repeatedly frustrated larger invading armies. Although historical evidence does not directly connect him to hidden treasure, later folklore often portrays him as a commander who concealed valuable resources to prevent their capture. Following his death in AD 1424, many stories claimed that secret knowledge concerning hidden wealth disappeared alongside him. Bohemia's landscape naturally encouraged such speculation. The region is filled with limestone caves, abandoned mines, dense forests, isolated monasteries, and medieval fortifications. During times of war, these locations offered practical hiding places for supplies and valuables. Archaeologists have occasionally uncovered concealed coin hoards dating to the Hussite period, confirming that medieval people did hide wealth during moments of crisis. Most discoveries, however, consist of relatively modest deposits rather than the legendary fortunes described in local folklore. Other theories suggest that no single treasure ever existed. Rather than one enormous cache, the so-called hidden wealth may represent numerous smaller deposits scattered across the countryside over many years of conflict. Individual soldiers, local communities, religious institutions, and military leaders may each have concealed valuables independently. As generations passed and memories faded, separate stories could easily merge into the legend of one great missing fortune. The role of religious treasures adds another layer to the mystery. The Hussite movement challenged established religious authority, and many churches, monasteries, and ecclesiastical institutions were affected during the conflicts. Valuable liturgical objects, including silver chalices, gilded reliquaries, illuminated manuscripts, and ceremonial vessels, sometimes changed hands during military campaigns. Some historians believe these objects were redistributed, melted down, or reused. Others wonder whether a portion disappeared into hidden refuges whose locations were never recorded. Beyond established history lie more speculative possibilities. Legends describe secret tunnels connecting castles to remote caves, hidden chambers sealed beneath monastery floors, and underground vaults protected by elaborate traps. Some tales even claim that supernatural guardians or mysterious lights mark the locations of concealed Hussite treasure on certain nights of the year. These stories belong firmly to regional folklore rather than documented history, yet they continue to inspire treasure hunters and local historians alike. Modern archaeological surveys occasionally revive public interest whenever medieval artifacts emerge unexpectedly from fields or forests. Every recovered coin, weapon, or fragment of armor reminds researchers that much of the Hussite world still lies buried beneath the landscape. Even relatively small discoveries demonstrate how incomplete the historical record remains after centuries of conflict and changing borders. Today, quiet villages, weathered castles, and forest paths conceal few outward signs of the wars that once transformed Bohemia. Yet, beneath those hills, forgotten hiding places may still exist, preserving objects concealed during one of medieval Europe's most turbulent eras. Whether the legendary wealth of the Hussite armies was divided, destroyed, recovered long ago, or still rests undisturbed beneath layers of earth and stone remains uncertain. Until new evidence emerges from the ground itself, the hidden wealth of the Hussites continues to occupy that elusive space where documented history and enduring legend quietly meet. As legends of hidden Hussite treasure disappear into the forests of Bohemia, another mystery draws us back to Imperial China. Here, the missing object is not a chest of gold or a forgotten cache of silver, but something equally valuable to historians. A collection of records that may once have revealed the final secrets of one of the Ming dynasty's most powerful rulers. Sometimes, the greatest mystery is not what was buried, but what was erased. North of Beijing, the mountains rise in gentle layers, their slopes covered with ancient pines that whisper in the wind. A broad ceremonial road leads toward the Ming tombs, where enormous stone guardian statues stand motionless after centuries of silent watch. Marble gateways, carved dragons, and vast earthen mounds create an atmosphere of solemn grandeur. Everything here was designed to preserve imperial dignity beyond death. Yet, hidden behind this remarkable landscape is an absence that has puzzled scholars for generations. The Yongle Emperor, who ruled from AD 1402 to 1424, was one of the most influential figures in Chinese history. He transformed the Ming dynasty through ambitious military campaigns, expanded diplomatic relations across Asia and the Indian Ocean, commissioned the monumental encyclopedia that bears his name, oversaw the construction of Beijing's Forbidden City, and authorized the extraordinary maritime expeditions led by Zheng He. His reign reshaped the empire in lasting ways. It was also during his reign that the site for the Ming imperial burial complex was established. The Changling Mausoleum, Yongle's final resting place, became the first and largest of the Ming tombs. Built according to principles of imperial ceremony and traditional geomancy, the complex occupies a carefully chosen valley surrounded by protective mountains, massive stone structures, ceremonial halls, and carefully planned avenues reflect the emperor's immense authority even after death. Unlike many royal tombs throughout the world, however, Changling has never been fully excavated. This decision has preserved the monument remarkably well, but it has also left countless questions unanswered. Archaeologists have largely favored conservation over excavation, partly because of concerns that modern technology cannot yet guarantee the safe preservation of everything that might be found inside. As a result, the emperor's burial chamber remains sealed, while much of its original contents remain unknown. Yet, the mystery extends beyond the unopened tomb itself. Chinese imperial administrations were famous for meticulous record-keeping. Construction projects, ceremonial rituals, labor assignments, inventories, and court decisions were often documented in extraordinary detail. It would seem reasonable to expect similarly comprehensive records concerning the planning and preparation of an emperor's burial. Surprisingly, however, important portions of those records appear to be incomplete or missing. Official dynastic histories certainly describe Yongle's reign and mention his mausoleum, but historians have noted that detailed documentation surrounding aspects of the tomb's construction, internal arrangement, burial inventory, and final sealing is far less complete than one might expect for such an important ruler. Whether these documents were never compiled in full, later lost, intentionally removed, or simply remain undiscovered continues to be debated. Several explanations have been proposed. The simplest is that ordinary historical loss is responsible. Fires, warfare, political upheaval, accidental destruction, and centuries of archival neglect have claimed countless historical documents throughout Chinese history. Even the most carefully maintained imperial archives were never immune to catastrophe. Missing records may simply reflect the natural erosion of history. Others suggest political motives may have contributed. The Yongle Emperor's path to the throne was controversial. He seized power after a civil war against his nephew, the Jianwen Emperor, whose ultimate fate remains uncertain. Sensitive details concerning imperial legitimacy, burial rituals, or succession may have been considered unsuitable for later preservation. If records contained politically delicate information, could some have been deliberately altered, restricted, or removed during subsequent reigns? Attention has also focused on the extraordinary secrecy surrounding imperial burials themselves. The construction of royal tombs often involved thousands of laborers, craftsmen, engineers, and officials working under strict supervision. Traditional accounts occasionally describe elaborate security measures intended to protect burial sites from robbers. While some later legends claim workers were isolated or sworn to secrecy regarding the tomb's interior, surviving historical evidence offers only limited support for such dramatic accounts. Nevertheless, the emphasis placed upon protecting imperial burial knowledge was very real. Without complete records, the imagination naturally fills the gaps. Some speculate that Changling may contain ceremonial objects unlike any previously discovered in Ming archaeology. Others wonder whether maps, diplomatic documents, or personal writings belonging to Yongle were interred alongside him according to imperial custom. Given his sponsorship of Zheng He's voyages and the vast administrative projects of his reign, could unknown records still rest inside the sealed burial chambers? Even more speculative theories suggest that missing archives intentionally concealed information about hidden passages, secondary burial chambers, or protective mechanisms designed to discourage intruders. No archaeological evidence presently confirms such features, but the continued absence of comprehensive documentation encourages these possibilities to persist. Modern technologies, including ground-penetrating surveys and non-invasive imaging, continue to improve our understanding of ancient tombs without disturbing their contents. Yet, even these methods reveal only fragments of what lies concealed beneath layers of earth and stone. The most important questions remain locked behind walls that have not been opened for 6 centuries. Today, visitors walk the sacred way beneath towering stone guardians, passing monuments built to preserve an emperor's memory forever. The mountains remain unchanged, the mausoleum remains sealed, and the silence surrounding its missing records endures. Somewhere between forgotten archives and unopened chambers may still rest the missing pages that explain how one of China's greatest emperors prepared for eternity. Until those pages are found, or the tomb itself is one day carefully explored, the enigma of the Yongle Emperor's missing tomb records remains one of the Ming Dynasty's most compelling unanswered mysteries. As the sealed tomb of the Yongle Emperor leaves us wondering whether forgotten records still lie hidden behind ancient walls, another mystery shifts our attention from missing documents to a missing identity. This time, the unanswered question is not who was buried, but who appeared years after a famous death, convincing many that history itself had made a terrible mistake. The streets are crowded with merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers moving between timber-framed houses beneath the gray skies of 15th century France. Church bells echo across the marketplace as whispers spread from one corner of the town to another. A woman on horseback approaches the city gates wearing noble clothing, her face partly concealed beneath a hood. Those who catch a glimpse stop what they are doing. Some stare in disbelief. Others fall silent. A few quietly speak a name that should already belong to the dead. Joan of Arc occupies a singular place in medieval history. Born around AD 1412 in the village of Domremy, she claimed to receive divine visions instructing her to support Charles VII during the final phase of the 100 Years' War. Against extraordinary odds, the young peasant woman inspired French forces during the lifting of the Siege of Orléans and played a crucial role in restoring confidence to a kingdom on the edge of collapse. Her story, however, ended with apparent certainty. Captured by Burgundian forces allied with England, Joan was handed over for trial. Detailed court records survive, documenting months of interrogation before she was convicted of heresy. On May 30th, AD 1431, she was publicly executed in Rouen. Numerous contemporary witnesses described the event, and later investigations gathered additional testimony from people who claimed to have seen her final moments. Historians generally regard the evidence surrounding her execution as unusually strong by medieval standards. Yet, only a few years later, an unexpected figure appeared. Around AD 1436, reports began circulating about a woman claiming, or at least allowing others to believe, that she was Joan of Arc, miraculously spared from execution. She became known to history as Jeanne des Armois after marrying the nobleman Robert des Armois, but during her early appearances many people believed they were seeing the Maid of Orleans returned from death. What makes this episode particularly intriguing is the reaction of those who knew Joan personally. According to several contemporary accounts, Joan's own brothers, Jean and Pierre d'Arc, publicly acknowledged the woman and traveled with her for a time. Together, they visited several towns, where she received gifts, honors, and financial support from people convinced they were welcoming France's national heroine. Noble families extended hospitality, while local communities celebrated her return. How could such recognition have occurred if the woman were an impostor? One possibility is surprisingly practical. 15th century Europe possessed no photography, no standardized identification, and only limited written descriptions of individuals. News traveled slowly, often through rumor rather than official communication. Joan had become a legendary figure, and relatively few people had known her intimately before her rise to fame. In such an environment, convincing similarities in appearance, mannerisms, or personal knowledge might have persuaded even skeptical observers. Others suggest that emotion played an equally powerful role. Joan's execution had shocked many throughout France. The hope that she had somehow escaped death may have made communities more willing to accept extraordinary claims. A society exhausted by decades of war could have embraced a symbol of renewal without demanding the level of proof expected today. Eventually, however, the story changed. Historical records indicate that in AD 1440, the woman appeared before Charles VII, the very king Joan had helped place securely upon the throne. Accounts differ regarding precisely what occurred, but later sources state that she confessed to falsely presenting herself as Joan and admitted participating in the deception. Following this acknowledgement, references to her as the Maid of Orléans largely disappear, and she continued living quietly under the name Jeanne des Armois. For many historians, this confession resolves the mystery. Yet, not every question disappears so easily. The exact motives behind her actions remain uncertain. Was she deliberately orchestrating an elaborate fraud for financial reward? Did influential supporters encourage the impersonation for political reasons? Could she initially have been swept into the role by others before events grew beyond her control? Medieval records provide only fragments, leaving room for different interpretations. There are also intriguing inconsistencies within the surviving accounts. Some descriptions portray her as possessing detailed knowledge of Joan's personal life that would have been difficult for an outsider to obtain. Others note the remarkable willingness of experienced soldiers and noblemen to accept her identity, at least temporarily. Were these simply examples of powerful wishful thinking, or did she have access to information now lost to history? More speculative theories venture even further. A small number of writers have questioned whether Joan truly died in Rouen at all, proposing secret rescues, political substitutions, or concealed identities. However, these ideas face considerable challenges from the extensive contemporary documentation supporting the traditional account of her execution. Most historians therefore regard them as highly unlikely, even while acknowledging that the appearance of Jeanne des Armois remains an unusual historical episode. Today, the marketplaces where crowds once gathered have long since changed, but the questions remain remarkably familiar. Why did so many intelligent people accept a woman whose identity was uncertain? Who was she before history briefly transformed her into one of Europe's most famous heroines? Somewhere behind scattered chronicles, faded letters, and conflicting memories stands a real individual whose true story remains only partly visible. Whether she was an ambitious impostor, an unwilling participant, or someone whose motives have been lost with time, the identity of the false Joan of Arc continues to blur the fragile boundary between documented history and enduring mystery. As the mystery of the false Joan of Arc reminds us that identities can disappear behind convincing appearances, another puzzle emerges from the political turmoil of Renaissance Europe. This time, the missing figure is not a person, but an entire royal fortune. Gold, jewels, official seals, and symbols of sovereignty entered a period of relentless war, and somewhere amid shifting alliances and collapsing dynasties they slipped beyond the reach of history. The first light of dawn spills across the Bay of Naples, illuminating the massive walls of Castel Nuovo. Merchant ships rock gently in the harbor, while bells echo from distant monasteries perched above the crowded streets. Inside the royal palace, vaulted chambers shelter heavy wooden chests reinforced with iron bands. Shelves display golden ceremonial vessels, jeweled crowns, silver plate, diplomatic gifts, and velvet pouches filled with coins bearing the faces of long-dead rulers. Courtiers move quietly through marble corridors, unaware that within a few decades, much of this wealth may disappear into one of Italy's most enduring historical mysteries. During the late 15th century, the Kingdom of Naples stood at the center of an increasingly unstable political landscape. Rich agricultural lands, thriving ports, and strategic control of the central Mediterranean made the kingdom a prize eagerly sought by rival European powers. The ruling Aragonese dynasty faced growing pressure as competing claims to the throne drew France, Spain, local nobles, and foreign armies into a series of conflicts that historians now associate with the Italian Wars. As kingdoms changed hands and alliances shifted with remarkable speed, royal treasuries became far more than collections of wealth. They financed armies, secured diplomatic agreements, rewarded loyal supporters, and represented the legitimacy of whoever claimed the crown. Gold coins, precious gemstones, official regalia, royal archives, and ceremonial objects often traveled alongside rulers during times of crisis. Losing the treasury could weaken not only a kingdom's finances but also its political authority. Historical records confirm that during the succession struggles, enormous quantities of wealth were moved repeatedly. Kings and claimants relocated valuables between castles, fortified cities, monasteries, and coastal strongholds as military fortunes changed. Naples itself experienced occupations, sieges, negotiations, and transfers of power that created ideal conditions for confusion. Inventories survive for portions of the royal collection, but they rarely provide a complete picture. Some documents contradict one another, while others disappear entirely after periods of warfare. This uncertainty has given rise to a persistent question. Did every treasure recorded by the royal administration actually reach its intended destination? One practical explanation suggests that much of the missing wealth never truly vanished at all. Royal treasuries were frequently divided among multiple secure locations to reduce the risk of complete loss. Valuable objects could be transferred to allied cities, melted into coinage to finance military campaigns, pledged as collateral for loans, or quietly absorbed into the possessions of victorious rulers. Over time, individual pieces might lose any clear connection to their Neapolitan origins. Yet, several historical references hint that not everything was accounted for. During moments of rapid evacuation, royal officials reportedly loaded valuables onto wagons and ships before advancing armies reached key fortresses. Detailed descriptions of these emergency movements are frustratingly incomplete. In several cases, records mention treasure convoys leaving one location without clearly documenting their arrival elsewhere. Whether these gaps reflect missing paperwork or genuine disappearances remains impossible to determine. The geography of southern Italy naturally encourages speculation. The region is filled with rugged mountain passes, ancient cave systems, coastal fortresses, volcanic landscapes, and medieval monasteries built upon even older foundations. Throughout history, these locations served as places of refuge during invasions. Local traditions preserved in villages across Campania and neighboring regions occasionally describe hidden royal chests concealed within caves, buried beneath abandoned towers, or sealed inside monastery walls to prevent their capture. Archaeological discoveries demonstrate that such practices were not impossible. Coin hoards dating to periods of conflict have been uncovered throughout Italy, often hidden by individuals who never returned to retrieve them. These finds confirm that people facing political instability frequently concealed wealth underground. However, none has been convincingly linked to the missing royal treasury of Naples on the scale imagined by later legends. Attention has also focused on the role of the sea. Naples possessed one of the Mediterranean's busiest harbors, and several rulers attempted to evacuate valuable possessions by ship during times of danger. Storms, piracy, naval battles, or simple navigational accidents could easily have claimed vessels carrying royal cargo. The Mediterranean still conceals thousands of undiscovered shipwrecks beneath layers of sediment, many resting along ancient trade routes used continuously for centuries. More speculative traditions expand the mystery further. Some claim that loyal courtiers secretly concealed the treasury with the intention of restoring the rightful dynasty after the wars ended. Others imagine encrypted maps, coded correspondence, or forgotten monastic records identifying hidden caches whose locations have since been lost. While no documentary evidence confirms these accounts, they continue to inspire historians, archaeologists, and treasure hunters searching for overlooked clues within scattered Renaissance archives. The complexity of the succession wars itself may be the greatest obstacle to solving the mystery. Authority changed hands repeatedly, documentation became fragmented, and countless individuals handled portions of the royal wealth across several decades of conflict. What later generations remember as a single missing treasury may in fact represent many separate losses gradually woven together into one enduring legend. Today, Castelnuovo still overlooks the harbor where ambassadors, merchants, and soldiers once arrived bearing news that could alter the fate of kingdoms. Its stone walls have outlasted every dynasty that ruled within them. Somewhere beneath the streets of Naples, within forgotten archives, beneath mountain ruins or beneath the quiet waters of the Mediterranean, fragments of that vanished royal treasury may still survive. Until unmistakable evidence emerges, the lost treasury of the Kingdom of Naples remains suspended between documented history and whispered tradition, reminding us that even the wealth of kings can disappear so completely that only the mystery endures. As the lost treasury of the Kingdom of Naples fades into uncertainty, another disappearance invites our attention, one measured not in gold or gemstones but in parchment, ink, and memory. Wealth can transform kingdoms, but knowledge can reshape entire civilizations. Somewhere within the turbulent history of medieval Burgundy, an archive once filled with the private workings of one of Europe's most powerful dynasties gradually dissolved, leaving behind questions that no surviving document can fully answer. The candles burn low inside a vaulted chamber lined with towering wooden shelves. Leather-bound registers rest beside tightly rolled charters sealed with crimson wax. Scribes sit at long oak tables, their quills moving steadily across sheets of fine parchment. Every treaty, financial account, diplomatic letter, military order, and personal correspondence is copied with meticulous care before being stored inside heavy chests reinforced with iron. Outside the palace walls, merchants crowd prosperous streets, while ambassadors from distant kingdoms wait patiently for audiences with the Duke of Burgundy. Inside these quiet rooms, another empire is taking shape, not through conquest alone, but through records that preserve every decision. During the 14th and 15th centuries, the Duchy of Burgundy emerged as one of the wealthiest and most influential powers in Western Europe. Under rulers such as Philip the Bold, John the Fearless, Philip the Good, and Charles the Bold, Burgundian territory stretched across much of present-day eastern France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. Its cities prospered through commerce, textile production, banking, and international trade, while its court became famous for extraordinary displays of wealth, diplomacy, and artistic patronage. Managing such a vast and complex state required an equally sophisticated administrative system. The Burgundian dukes maintained extensive archives containing legal agreements, taxation records, military planning, correspondence with foreign rulers, marriage negotiations, intelligence reports, commercial contracts, and instructions exchanged between officials scattered across their territories. These collections were not merely bureaucratic necessities. They formed the intellectual framework of one of Europe's most advanced governments before the rise of modern nation-states. Yet, much of that documentary world no longer survives intact. The turning point came after the death of Charles the Bold in AD 1477 at the Battle of Nancy. His defeat shattered Burgundian ambitions almost overnight. Rival powers moved quickly to divide his territories, while political authority fractured across regions that had once answered to a single court. In the confusion that followed, archives were transferred, divided, seized, neglected, or simply abandoned. Some documents undoubtedly survived. Modern historians continue to study thousands of Burgundian records preserved in archives across Belgium, France, the Netherlands, Austria, and elsewhere. These surviving collections have revealed remarkable details about medieval government, diplomacy, finance, and court life. Yet, references within those very records point toward additional documents that are no longer known to exist. This has given rise to an enduring mystery. What disappeared alongside the collapse of Burgundian power? One explanation is entirely practical. Medieval archives were vulnerable to every force capable of reshaping history. Fires destroyed city halls, wars consumed monasteries, floods damaged libraries. Political revolutions often regarded previous administrations as obstacles rather than treasures worth preserving. Over generations, individual documents could easily be misplaced, discarded, recycled, or forgotten without anyone recognizing their future historical importance. Yet, certain gaps appear unusually significant. Historians have identified references to diplomatic correspondence that no longer survives, inventories that seem incomplete, and financial accounts whose companion volumes have disappeared. Missing letters between rulers, military commanders, and foreign ambassadors may once have recorded negotiations that influenced major European events. Without them, historians must often reconstruct history from scattered fragments rather than complete narratives. Some researchers wonder whether portions of the archives were intentionally removed. The Burgundian court maintained extensive diplomatic networks reaching England, the Holy Roman Empire, Italian city-states, and the kingdoms of the Iberian Peninsula. Sensitive correspondence involving succession disputes, secret alliances, espionage, or financial agreements may have been considered politically dangerous after Burgundy's collapse. Could certain collections have been deliberately concealed or destroyed to protect influential families or erase compromising evidence? Private archives add another layer of uncertainty. Many leading Burgundian officials maintained personal collections alongside official government records. After the duchy's fall, noble households scattered across Europe, carrying letters, account books, and legal documents into private estates. Some collections eventually entered public archives, while others disappeared through inheritance, neglect, or simple anonymity. A forgotten chest resting in the attic of a medieval manor centuries ago could easily have contained documents capable of transforming historians' understanding of the period. More speculative traditions imagine discoveries still waiting. Legends occasionally speak of sealed monastic libraries where Burgundian officials hid politically sensitive records before invading armies arrived. Others describe hidden vaults beneath castles abandoned during the Wars of Succession. While no convincing evidence supports these stories, Archaeology has repeatedly demonstrated that forgotten archives do emerge unexpectedly. Entire collections of medieval letters have survived within monastery walls, cathedral libraries, and neglected municipal buildings, unnoticed for centuries. Perhaps the most intriguing possibility concerns what those missing papers might actually contain. Could they preserve unknown diplomatic negotiations that reshape the balance of power across Europe? Might they reveal financial systems more sophisticated than historians currently recognize? Could they contain eyewitness accounts of famous political assassinations, succession crises, or military campaigns described only briefly in surviving chronicles? Every missing document represents not simply a lost object, but a missing voice from the past. Today, magnificent Burgundian palaces have become museums, while many of the administrative buildings that once housed these archives have long since changed their purpose. Visitors admire illuminated manuscripts, tapestries, and works of art that survive the passage of centuries, rarely noticing the invisible absence left by records that did not. Somewhere inside, overlooked collections, forgotten monastery libraries, uncatalogued estate archives, or unidentified bundles of parchment, fragments of Burgundy's missing documentary world may still endure. Until those pages are rediscovered, the secret contents of the Burgundian duke's lost archives remain hidden between silence and memory, reminding us that history is shaped not only by what survives, but also by everything that quietly disappears. As the lost archives of Burgundy remind us that entire chapters of history can disappear without warning, another mystery takes us eastward, where silence lingers not on forgotten shelves, but within magnificent mausoleums. Here, the missing pieces are neither documents nor treasure. They are the very people these tombs were built to honor. Behind elaborate domes and carved stone lies an unsettling question. Why were some of the grandest graves of the Timurid world found empty? The turquoise domes of Samarkand shimmer beneath the bright Central Asian sky. Intricate mosaics of cobalt and gold cover towering facades, while geometric tiles catch the afternoon light with remarkable precision. Marble courtyards echo only with the wind, and elegant Arabic inscriptions flow across walls built to celebrate rulers whose names once commanded armies stretching from Persia to the borders of India. Every monument proclaims permanence. Every mausoleum promises eternal remembrance. Yet, behind some of these splendid structures, unexpected emptiness has puzzled historians for generations. The Timurid Empire emerged in the late 14th century under the rule of Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane. From his capital at Samarkand, he forged one of the largest empires of his age through military conquest, diplomacy, and monumental architecture. His descendants continued transforming Central Asia into a center of science, art, literature, and engineering. Lavish mausoleums became symbols not only of dynastic prestige, but also of spiritual devotion and political legitimacy. Among the most celebrated of these monuments is the Gur-e-Amir, the mausoleum traditionally associated with Timur himself. Its soaring dome and exquisite decoration have survived for centuries, inspiring visitors from around the world. Other Timurid nobles and members of the royal family were honored with similarly impressive burial complexes scattered across Samarkand, Herat, and other important cities throughout the empire. Yet, archaeological investigations and historical records have occasionally revealed an unexpected detail. Not every magnificent tomb appears to contain the remains expected within it. In several Timurid burial sites, researchers have encountered empty burial chambers, incomplete graves, or evidence suggesting that human remains were either never placed inside or were removed long ago. In some cases, inscriptions clearly identify distinguished individuals, yet the physical evidence beneath those markers tells a different story. These discoveries have encouraged a variety of explanations, each revealing a different aspect of Timurid history. The most practical possibility is that appearances can be deceptive. Across the Islamic world, monumental mausoleums sometimes included symbolic cenotaphs placed above the actual burial chamber. The beautifully carved sarcophagus visible to visitors often served as a ceremonial marker, while the true burial lay in a simpler chamber below. Without careful excavation, distinguishing between symbolic monuments and genuine graves can be surprisingly difficult. Some apparently empty tombs may simply reflect architectural traditions rather than historical mysteries. However, this explanation does not account for every case. Political instability repeatedly shook the Timurid Empire after Timur's death in AD 1405. Rival branches of the dynasty competed for authority, cities changed hands, and successive invasions disrupted once stable regions. During such periods, royal burials could become vulnerable to disturbance. Valuable grave goods, although generally limited by Islamic burial customs, might still attract looters. More importantly, the remains themselves could be relocated for protection or political reasons. Royal reburial has occurred throughout history. When wars threatened sacred sites, loyal followers sometimes transferred the remains of rulers to more secure locations. Such actions were often conducted discreetly, especially if revealing the new burial place might expose it to future danger. If Timurid nobles were reinterred elsewhere during times of conflict, written records describing those events may simply have failed to survive. Natural forces may also have played an important role. Central Asia has experienced earthquakes, floods, shifting groundwater, and centuries of urban transformation. Mausoleums damaged by structural collapse were occasionally repaired or rebuilt, potentially disturbing earlier burials. Over hundreds of years, repeated restoration efforts could alter or obscure the original arrangement of tombs without leaving complete documentation. Yet several questions remain difficult to answer. Some historical accounts describe elaborate funeral ceremonies for prominent Timurid figures whose identified tombs later produced little or no physical evidence. Were these individuals buried somewhere entirely different? Could symbolic monuments have been erected in one city while actual burials occurred elsewhere according to family wishes or religious considerations? Medieval chronicles rarely provide enough detail to resolve these uncertainties. More speculative theories have naturally emerged. Local traditions sometimes describe secret underground burial chambers concealed beneath visible mausoleums, intended to protect royal remains from desecration. Others speak of hidden passages through which trusted attendants quietly removed bodies during periods of invasion. While archaeology has occasionally uncovered unexpected chambers beneath historic monuments, no consistent evidence confirms that such concealed burial systems were widely employed by the Timurids. The extraordinary reverence surrounding Timur himself has further encouraged legend. Stories passed down through generations occasionally blur the distinction between documented royal burials and folklore, suggesting that some nobles deliberately concealed their final resting places to avoid becoming targets for enemies or grave robbers. Although these traditions remain impossible to verify, they reflect a broader historical reality. Powerful rulers often feared what might happen to their tombs after death. Modern archaeological methods continue to reveal new details about Timurid architecture without always providing clear answers about the people those monuments were built to commemorate. Ground-penetrating surveys, conservation projects, and carefully controlled excavations have expanded our understanding of these remarkable sites, yet the silence within certain burial chambers remains. Today, the blue domes of Samarkand continue to dominate the skyline just as they did 6 centuries ago. Visitors admire the breathtaking artistry while standing above graves whose true stories may never be fully known. somewhere beneath polished stone floors, behind sealed walls, or within forgotten records still waiting to be discovered. The missing chapters of these royal burials may yet survive. Until then, the mystery of the empty tombs of the Timurid nobles endures, quietly reminding us that even monuments built to preserve memory can sometimes conceal remarkable absences. As the empty tombs of the Timurid nobles leave us wondering whether the dead were ever truly laid to rest where history claims, another mystery emerges from medieval Europe. Once again, the greatest absence is not a missing treasure or an abandoned monument, but a collection of documents that may have carried the private intentions of one of the era's most enigmatic chivalric orders. When those records disappeared, they took countless answers with them. The Great Hall is illuminated by rows of candles, whose light dances across polished armor and embroidered banners. Noblemen stand in solemn silence beneath vaulted ceilings decorated with painted shields and crimson draperies. At the center of the chamber, an ornate emblem hangs from a heavy chain, a dragon curled into a circle, its tail wrapped around its own neck, symbolizing loyalty, sacrifice, and vigilance. Nearby, sealed parchments lie inside carved wooden chests, each bearing wax impressions reserved for only the highest members of the order. Their contents are known to almost no one. The Order of the Dragon was established in AD 1408 by King Sigismund of Hungary, who would later become Holy Roman Emperor. Created during an era of political uncertainty and increasing military pressure along Europe's southeastern frontier, the order united influential nobles under an oath to defend Christianity and protect the crown. Membership included some of the most powerful aristocrats of Central and Eastern Europe, among them rulers, military commanders, and regional princes whose influence extended far beyond the borders of Hungary. One member would later become especially famous. Vlad II of Wallachia joined the Order of the Dragon during the early 15th century, adopting the title Dracul, meaning dragon. His son, Vlad III, inherited the name Dracula, a title that centuries later became inseparably linked with legend. Yet, beyond these famous associations, the order itself remains surprisingly elusive. Unlike many medieval institutions, relatively few original records concerning its internal operations survive. Its founding charter is known, along with scattered references in royal correspondence, diplomatic documents, and contemporary chronicles. These sources describe the order's ideals, ceremonial symbolism, and political significance. However, historians have long suspected that far more documentation once existed. Membership registers, internal correspondence, strategic agreements, ceremonial instructions, financial accounts, and official meeting records would almost certainly have been necessary to administer such an influential organization. Where did those papers go? The simplest explanation lies in the turbulent history of Central Europe. The regions connected to the Order of the Dragon experienced repeated wars, dynastic struggles, invasions, and shifting political boundaries throughout the 15th and subsequent centuries. Royal archives changed hands numerous times. Castles were destroyed, monasteries burned, and administrative centers abandoned or reorganized. In such circumstances, the gradual disappearance of institutional records is hardly unusual. Yet, the surviving evidence hints that the losses may have been especially significant. Scattered medieval letters occasionally refer to decisions or agreements whose original documentation no longer survives. References to meetings between members appear without accompanying records describing what was actually discussed. Historians can often identify that important communications once existed while remaining unable to locate the documents themselves. Political secrecy may have contributed to their disappearance. The Order of the Dragon operated within a complex network of royal alliances, noble rivalries, and military campaigns extending across Hungary, Wallachia, Serbia, Bohemia, and neighboring regions. Sensitive correspondence concerning succession disputes, military planning, diplomatic negotiations, or intelligence gathering may have been deliberately restricted from widespread circulation. If certain papers contained politically dangerous information, later rulers might have found compelling reasons to remove them from public archives. Another possibility reflects the nature of medieval chivalric orders themselves. Some ceremonial knowledge was intentionally transmitted through personal instruction rather than written manuals. Oaths, rituals, symbolic meanings, and internal customs could remain known only to initiated members. If relatively few written copies ever existed, the loss of only a handful of manuscripts might have erased entire traditions from history. The connection with Vlad II Dracul has inspired even broader speculation. Because of his later association with the Dracula legend, modern popular culture often imagines the Order of the Dragon as a secret society guarding hidden knowledge or mysterious relics. Historical evidence paints a far more conventional picture of a political and military order loyal to the crown. Nevertheless, the scarcity of surviving records has allowed imaginative interpretations to flourish, especially where documented history leaves noticeable gaps. Some researchers have wondered whether portions of the archives were intentionally concealed rather than destroyed. Royal fortresses throughout Hungary and neighboring regions contained secure treasury rooms, chapel vaults, and underground storage chambers designed to protect important possessions during wartime. If confidential records were hidden during periods of invasion, their custodians may never have returned to recover them. Over centuries, forgotten repositories have occasionally yielded medieval charters, legal documents, and correspondence once believed permanently lost. Others point toward private noble collections. Members of the order often belong to Europe's most influential dynasties. Personal letters and official papers may have remained within family archives rather than royal repositories. Many aristocratic collections were later dispersed through inheritance, warfare, or simple neglect. Even today, historians continue discovering overlooked medieval manuscripts within castle libraries and regional archives whose contents had never been fully catalogued. More speculative traditions speak of encrypted correspondence, symbolic ciphers, and hidden messages exchanged between leading members of the order. While medieval diplomacy certainly employed codes on occasion, no convincing evidence suggests that the order maintained elaborate secret archives of the kind imagined in later legends. Even so, the possibility that undiscovered correspondence survives somewhere continues to intrigue scholars. Today, the dragon emblem remains preserved in museums, manuscripts, and carved stone, reminding us that the order itself was very real. Yet, the papers that once documented its daily decisions, private alliances, and internal ambitions remain remarkably scarce. Somewhere within forgotten castle archives, monastery libraries, uncatalogued family collections, or sealed chests untouched for centuries, fragments of those missing documents may still exist. Until they emerge into the light, the disappearance of the Order of the Dragon's secret records remains another quiet reminder that history often loses not only its treasures, but also the words that once explained them. As the missing records of the Order of the Dragon fade into forgotten archives and silent castle vaults, another disappearance carries us across the Atlantic to the high valleys of central Mexico. Once again, the mystery is written not in buried treasure or abandoned monuments, but in documents that may once have preserved the earliest memories of an entire civilization. If those records truly existed, their absence has left one of the greatest migrations in the ancient Americas shrouded in uncertainty. Morning mist drifts across the waters of Lake Texcoco as the first rays of sunlight illuminate the ruins of ancient causeways stretching toward the island where Tenochtitlan once stood. Broken temple foundations rise above the modern city, while fragments of carved stone still bear symbols of gods, warriors, and distant journeys. Somewhere within these vanished landscapes, generations of priests and scribes once preserved the story of how their ancestors arrived here. Yet, the pages that may have told that story have almost entirely disappeared. According to Aztec tradition, the Mexica people did not originate in the Valley of Mexico. Instead, they spoke of a distant ancestral homeland known as Aztlan, a place remembered in painted codices, oral traditions, and ceremonial histories. Guided by their patron deity Huitzilopochtli, they are said to have departed this homeland and begun a long migration across unfamiliar landscapes before eventually founding Tenochtitlan in AD 1325. The migration occupies a central place in Aztec identity. It explains not only where the Mexica believed they came from, but also why they considered their capital a sacred destination chosen through divine signs. The famous image of an eagle perched upon a cactus, now preserved on the modern flag of Mexico, originates from this tradition. Yet, despite its importance, the precise route of the migration remains one of Mesoamerican history's greatest unanswered questions. Part of the difficulty lies in the disappearance of the original records. Before European contact, the Aztecs maintained sophisticated systems of painted manuscripts known today as codices. These works combined pictographic symbols, calendrical information, genealogies, tribute records, religious knowledge, and historical narratives. Skilled scribes carefully recorded dynastic events and ceremonial traditions using images that conveyed meaning through an established visual language. Many historians believe that detailed migration histories once existed among these manuscripts. Tragically, very few pre-conquest Aztec codices survive today. During the early colonial period, warfare, accidental destruction, environmental damage, and deliberate campaigns against indigenous religious traditions resulted in the loss of countless manuscripts. Some were burned because they were associated with pre-Christian beliefs. Others simply deteriorated over time in climates unfavorable to their preservation. What remains represents only a small fraction of what once existed. The surviving sources offer valuable clues, but they rarely agree completely. Colonial-era codices produced after the Spanish conquest preserve versions of the migration story, often combining indigenous traditions with European methods of historical recording. Documents such as the Codex Boturini and several later chronicles describe stages of the Mexica journey, naming temporary settlements and sacred locations along the way. Yet different accounts sometimes vary in chronology, geography, or symbolism, making it difficult to separate historical memory from sacred tradition. This has led to an enduring question. Was Aztlan an actual geographical location, a symbolic homeland, or a combination of both? Some archaeologists argue that the migration reflects genuine movements of Nahua-speaking peoples into central Mexico over several generations. Linguistic evidence, material culture, and regional settlement patterns suggest that population movements from the north did occur before the rise of the Aztec Empire. However, identifying one specific place as Aztlan has proven remarkably elusive. Others propose that the migration story became increasingly symbolic over time. Like many foundation traditions around the world, it may preserve authentic historical memories woven together with religious meaning, political legitimacy, and mythological themes. Sacred landmarks could have replaced forgotten geographical details, while generations of storytellers shaped the narrative to reinforce the Mexica's divine destiny. Yet, the disappearance of earlier records leaves many possibilities open. Had more pre-conquest codices survived, they might have contained place names, maps, genealogies, or chronological details capable of transforming modern understanding of Aztec origins. Instead, historians must reconstruct the journey by comparing fragmented manuscripts, archaeological discoveries, oral traditions, and linguistic evidence, each offering only part of a much larger picture. Some researchers have suggested that additional migration records may still exist in overlooked collections. During the colonial period, indigenous manuscripts occasionally entered monastery libraries, private archives, or government repositories. A small number have resurfaced centuries later after remaining unnoticed among unrelated collections. Every unexpected discovery demonstrates that forgotten documents can survive under extraordinary circumstances, raising the possibility that unidentified codices still await careful examination. More speculative theories extend even further. Some writers imagine hidden temple libraries where priests concealed sacred manuscripts before the fall of Tenochtitlan. Others believe that oral traditions preserved by indigenous communities may retain fragments of older histories never committed to surviving colonial documents. While such ideas remain difficult to verify, they reflect a broader truth. The destruction of written records does not always erase memory completely. Today, the foundations of Tenochtitlan lie beneath the streets of modern Mexico City, while archaeologists continue uncovering remarkable traces of the civilization that once flourished there. Every carved stone, painted fragment, and newly discovered artifact adds another piece to a puzzle whose opening chapter remains incomplete. Somewhere, perhaps within an overlooked codex, an uncatalogued archive, or traditions passed quietly through generations, the missing story of the Mexica migration may still survive. Until that evidence emerges, the mystery of the lost Aztec migration records continues to remind us that the journey which shaped one of the greatest civilizations in the ancient Americas may never be fully retraced. As the lost migration records of the Aztecs remind us that entire histories can disappear with the pages that recorded them, our journey now turns toward an island where another mystery was measured not in forgotten words, but in glittering wealth. Deep within the tropical landscapes of Sri Lanka, stories have endured for centuries about a royal fortune that slipped into silence during the collapse of a powerful kingdom, leaving behind little more than scattered clues and persistent legend. The humid air hangs over dense forests as morning light filters through towering palms and ancient banyan trees. Hidden beneath layers of vegetation lie broken stone walls, weathered gateways, and the faint outlines of moats that once protected one of the island's greatest capitals. Nearby rivers move quietly toward the sea, carrying the same waters that flowed past royal palaces centuries ago. Somewhere beneath this peaceful landscape, according to generations of local tradition, enormous quantities of gold may still remain beyond the reach of history. The kingdom of Kotte emerged during the early 15th century as one of the most influential kingdoms in Sri Lanka. Founded by Parakramabahu VI, it became a center of political authority, international trade, literature, and religious patronage. Its strategic location allowed merchants from Arabia, India, Southeast Asia, and later Europe to exchange spices, gemstones, ivory, elephants, textiles, and precious metals. Wealth flowed steadily into the royal treasury, while elaborate temples and palaces reflected the kingdom's growing prosperity. Historical sources describe Kotte as a remarkably fortified capital. Protected by marshlands, rivers, and carefully engineered defenses, the city was considered difficult to attack. Royal residences contained ceremonial halls, religious shrines, administrative buildings, and treasury chambers where taxes, tribute, diplomatic gifts, and precious objects were stored. Gold held both economic and symbolic importance, appearing in royal ornaments, religious donations, ceremonial vessels, and diplomatic exchanges. Yet, the kingdom's stability did not last forever. By the 16th century, internal rivalries, succession disputes, and growing Portuguese influence transformed the political landscape of Sri Lanka. Competing claimants struggled for power, while foreign alliances complicated existing conflicts. The kingdom gradually weakened, and authority became increasingly fragmented. During these turbulent decades, royal wealth faced constant danger. It is within this period of uncertainty that the mystery begins. According to long-standing traditions, large quantities of royal gold disappeared before the kingdom's effective collapse. Some accounts claim that loyal officials removed the treasury to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. Others suggest that members of the royal family secretly relocated valuable possessions while abandoning vulnerable sections of the capital. Official records from the period mention tribute, taxation, and diplomatic gifts, but they do not provide a complete inventory of everything the royal treasury contained during its final years. This absence has encouraged generations of speculation. One practical explanation is that no single hidden treasure ever existed. Royal wealth may simply have been dispersed gradually through warfare, political negotiation, and foreign control. Gold could be melted down, traded, redistributed among rival rulers, or carried abroad by departing nobles. Over time, countless individual losses might easily evolve into the legend of one enormous missing fortune. Yet, local traditions tell a different story. Throughout the region surrounding ancient Kotte, stories persist of buried chambers concealed beneath ruined foundations, hidden vaults protected by forgotten tunnels, and royal caches sealed beneath temple floors before invading forces arrived. Dense forests, abandoned waterways, and centuries of urban development have dramatically altered the landscape, making it difficult to distinguish folklore from historical possibility. Archaeology has revealed only fragments of the ancient capital. Excavations have uncovered defensive structures, religious sites, pottery, coins, and architectural remains that confirm the city's importance. However, much of medieval Kotte now lies beneath the modern suburbs of Colombo, limiting opportunities for extensive excavation. Entire sections of the former capital remain inaccessible beneath roads, buildings, and neighborhoods constructed over many generations. This unusual situation leaves open an intriguing possibility. Could portions of the royal treasury still lie buried beneath areas that have never been archaeologically explored? Other theories point toward the island's rivers and wetlands. During moments of crisis, transporting valuable cargo through marshes or waterways may have offered greater security than using exposed roads. If treasure boats sank, or if heavy chests were deliberately concealed within flooded landscapes intended for later recovery, natural changes over 5 centuries could have erased every visible trace. More speculative traditions weave together history and legend. Some stories speak of trusted monks receiving royal treasures for safekeeping inside remote monasteries hidden within Sri Lanka's forests. Others describe secret caves known only to a handful of royal guardians sworn never to reveal their locations. In certain local legends, supernatural protectors watch over the missing gold, ensuring that only those with honorable intentions could ever discover it. These tales belong to folklore rather than documented history, yet they reflect the deep cultural significance the mystery continues to hold. The greatest challenge lies in the fragmentary nature of the surviving evidence. Political upheaval, colonial intervention, environmental change, and the passage of centuries have left historians with only scattered references rather than complete narratives. Every newly translated chronicle, archaeological discovery, or overlooked inscription adds another small piece to a puzzle that remains far from complete. Today, little remains of the once magnificent royal capital visible above the surface. Birds nest among weathered stones where kings once received foreign ambassadors, while the surrounding forests quietly reclaim the landscape. Somewhere beneath those ruins, beneath forgotten waterways, or beneath the streets of the modern city that grew over the ancient kingdom, fragments of Kotte's lost wealth may still endure. Until unmistakable evidence emerges from the earth, the lost gold of the kingdom of Kotte remains suspended between history, memory, and legend, inviting us to wonder whether one of Sri Lanka's greatest royal treasures has truly been lost, or merely forgotten. As the lost gold of the kingdom of Kotte disappears into forests, rivers, and forgotten foundations, another mystery reminds us that history can lose something even more valuable than treasure. Gold may enrich a kingdom, but words can alter the course of civilizations. This time, the missing objects are not jeweled crowns or buried chests, but records that may once have preserved one of the most ambitious diplomatic efforts of the medieval world, documents that disappeared while the future of two great Christian traditions hung in delicate balance. Morning sunlight pours through tall stained glass windows, casting shifting patterns across polished stone floors inside a grand Florentine hall. Rich tapestries soften the walls, while long wooden tables are covered with parchment, wax seals, and carefully prepared ink. Bishops in embroidered robes converse quietly with scholars, translators, and imperial advisors. Greek and Latin voices fill the chamber, each sentence translated with painstaking care. Every word spoken here carries extraordinary weight, for these negotiations seek nothing less than the reconciliation of churches divided for nearly 4 centuries. The Council of Florence, held between AD 1438 and 1439 after first convening in Ferrara, represented one of the most significant diplomatic and theological gatherings of the late Middle Ages. Delegations from the Byzantine Empire traveled west, hoping to secure military assistance against the expanding Ottoman state. In return, church leaders attempted to resolve centuries of disagreement between the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic traditions, disputes that had persisted since the Great Schism of AD 1054. The participants included some of the era's most influential figures. Byzantine Emperor John VIII Palaiologos personally attended the council alongside Patriarch Joseph II of Constantinople, distinguished theologians, bishops, monks, and scholars. On the western side stood Pope Eugene IV and numerous representatives of the Latin Church. Their debates addressed profound questions involving theology, church authority, liturgical practice, and centuries of accumulated misunderstanding. Much of what occurred is well documented. Official decrees survive, including the famous Lietenter Caeli, the declaration proclaiming a union between the churches. Contemporary letters, diaries, and chronicles also preserve valuable accounts of the council's public sessions. Historians possess a remarkable body of material describing the event. Yet, beneath these official records lies a quieter mystery. Negotiations of such complexity almost certainly produced countless preliminary drafts, private memoranda, confidential correspondence, working translations, personal notes, and informal reports exchanged between delegates. Many references within surviving documents point toward discussions held behind closed doors, conversations that shaped the final agreement but left only faint traces in the historical record. Where did those papers go? The most practical explanation is also the most familiar. Medieval archives were extraordinarily vulnerable. Fires, floods, political upheavals, accidental loss, and centuries of administrative change claimed innumerable documents throughout Europe. Temporary working papers often received far less protection than official decrees intended for permanent preservation. Many may simply have been discarded once the council concluded. Yet several circumstances make the losses particularly intriguing. The union achieved at Florence proved remarkably fragile. Although many delegates signed the agreement, substantial opposition soon emerged within the Byzantine world. After returning home, numerous church leaders faced resistance from clergy and ordinary believers who rejected the compromise. Following the fall of Constantinople in AD 1453, the practical influence of the council declined dramatically, and the hoped-for lasting reunion between East and West largely dissolved. Could this changing political landscape have influenced the survival of certain records? Some historians suggest that documents associated with unsuccessful or controversial negotiations may have received less attention from later archivists. Papers considered politically inconvenient, theologically sensitive, or diplomatically embarrassing could gradually disappear through neglect rather than deliberate destruction. In an age when archives were copied selectively, omission alone could erase important evidence. Other scholars focus on the Byzantine delegation itself. The delegates carried numerous manuscripts, theological works, and official papers between Constantinople and Italy. During the decades that followed, the Byzantine Empire entered its final period of decline. Wars, economic hardship, and the eventual Ottoman conquest scattered libraries, monasteries, and private collections. If confidential council documents returned eastward with the delegates, many may simply have been caught in the broader loss of Byzantine archives. Private correspondence presents another possibility. Leading participants undoubtedly exchanged letters before, during, and after the negotiations. Diplomats rarely relied solely upon official statements. Personal observations concerning strategy, political pressures, or disagreements behind closed doors may have circulated among trusted associates rather than entering public archives. Some of those letters may still rest unidentified within medieval collections, their significance overlooked because of incomplete cataloging or uncertain authorship. This uncertainty has encouraged more speculative ideas. Some researchers wonder whether undiscovered monastic libraries or forgotten ecclesiastical archives might still preserve drafts or correspondence connected to the council. Throughout Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean, important medieval manuscripts have unexpectedly emerged from monastery collections after remaining unnoticed for centuries. Every such discovery demonstrates that archival surprises remain possible, even after hundreds of years. Others imagine documents intentionally withheld because they revealed compromises or private discussions considered too controversial for public circulation. While no convincing evidence confirms deliberate suppression, diplomacy has always depended upon confidential negotiation, and not every conversation was intended for future generations to read. The surviving official texts tell us what agreements were reached, but they rarely reveal every hesitation, disagreement, or personal persuasion that shaped those final decisions. We know the destination of the negotiations far better than the winding path that led there. Today, Florence continues to preserve magnificent churches and palaces where delegates once debated questions that affected millions of believers. Visitors admire frescoes and architecture, often unaware that countless conversations held within those walls survive only as faint echoes in scattered references. Somewhere inside forgotten monastery libraries, uncatalogued ecclesiastical archives, or overlooked bundles of medieval correspondence, additional voices from the Council of Florence may still be waiting to speak again. Until those missing records are found, the vanished documents of one of history's greatest diplomatic gatherings remain another quiet reminder that history often preserves its conclusions while allowing the most revealing conversations to fade into silence. As the missing records of the Council of Florence leave us wondering how many decisive conversations disappeared between official lines, another mystery carries us far from palace halls and cathedral chambers. This time, the unanswered questions are traced not in diplomatic correspondence, but across faded coastlines drawn in ink. Before maps could guide explorers across the Atlantic with confidence, someone had to transform uncertain voyages into geography. Yet, the identities of those early mapmakers have largely vanished, leaving behind only fragments of their remarkable work. Cold Atlantic winds sweep across steep cliffs where gray waves crash against dark stone. Seabirds circle above narrow fjords, and beyond the horizon stretches an ocean that medieval Europeans regarded as vast, dangerous, and largely unknowable. Inside a small wooden hall, illuminated by whale oil lamps, a man carefully spreads a sheet of prepared parchment across a rough table. Beside him lie measuring cords, carved rulers, compass markings, and stories carried by sailors who have returned from lands few others have ever seen. Every coastline he sketches is shaped by memory rather than direct observation. Every line may preserve knowledge that could otherwise disappear forever. Long before Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic, Norse seafarers had already ventured westward from Scandinavia through Iceland and Greenland. Around AD 1000, expeditions led by figures such as Leif Erikson reached lands farther west that later Icelandic sagas remembered as Vinland. Modern archaeology has confirmed that Norse settlers established a short-lived settlement at Leans au Meadows in present-day Newfoundland, demonstrating that these voyages were historical realities rather than mere legend. Yet archaeology answers only part of the story. The voyages themselves required navigation across thousands of kilometers of open ocean, through changing weather, unpredictable currents, drifting ice, and unfamiliar coastlines. Such repeated journeys almost certainly depended upon accumulated geographical knowledge passed between generations of sailors. Whether that knowledge existed primarily in memory, oral instruction, written descriptions, or early maps remains one of the most intriguing questions surrounding the Vinland traditions. The surviving Icelandic sagas offer valuable but incomplete clues. The saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red, written centuries after the events they describe, contain remarkably detailed descriptions of coastlines, sailing directions, landmarks, rivers, forests, and natural resources. Although these texts are literary works rather than navigational manuals, their geographical detail has led many scholars to wonder whether they ultimately drew upon much older sources now lost. If so, who created those original records? The Viking world certainly possessed skilled navigators capable of remarkable feats of open sea travel. Mariners relied upon experience, celestial observations, coastal landmarks, seasonal winds, ocean swells, bird migrations, and perhaps simple navigational aids such as sun compasses. However, very little direct evidence survives concerning how they documented geographical knowledge beyond oral tradition. Unlike the Mediterranean world, where Portolan charts later flourished, Scandinavia has yielded few surviving medieval maps from the Viking Age itself. This absence does not necessarily mean that no maps ever existed. Perishable materials such as wood, wax tablets, leather, bark, or cloth rarely survive 1,000 years, especially in environments unfavorable to preservation. Even parchment manuscripts could easily disappear through fire, moisture, warfare, or simple neglect. One practical explanation suggests that formal cartography played only a limited role. Experienced captains may have relied primarily upon memorized sailing routes transmitted directly from mentor to apprentice. Such oral systems have guided maritime communities around the world for centuries with extraordinary accuracy. If geographical knowledge remained largely unwritten, then the disappearance of individual navigators would gradually erase details that no manuscript ever preserved. Yet other evidence points toward a more complex picture. Medieval Iceland became one of Europe's great centers of historical writing. Monasteries and learned communities preserved genealogies, legal codes, poetry, and historical narratives with exceptional care. If scholars recorded family histories extending across generations, might they also have copied geographical information inherited from earlier explorers? References within later manuscripts occasionally hint at older written sources whose identities remain uncertain. The famous Vinland map has inevitably entered this discussion. When it first emerged during the 20th century, The map appeared to depict Vinland centuries before Columbus, generating enormous excitement. Scientific analysis and decades of scholarly debate, however, have led most experts to conclude that the document is almost certainly a modern forgery, rather than an authentic medieval artifact. Although the map itself is widely rejected as genuine, the questions it raised remain entirely legitimate. If medieval knowledge of Vinland circulated at all, what form did it originally take? Some historians point toward lost ecclesiastical collections. Clergy traveling between Greenland, Iceland, Norway, and continental Europe carried manuscripts across vast distances. Monastic libraries frequently copied geographical descriptions alongside religious texts. A modest notebook containing sailing directions could easily disappear among thousands of manuscripts scattered through later wars, fires, and political upheavals. Others focus on royal courts. Norwegian and Icelandic rulers maintained contacts with Greenland for centuries. Administrative officials collecting taxes or appointing bishops required practical knowledge of distant settlements. Cartographers working for royal administrations may have prepared regional sketches that never survived because they were regarded as temporary working documents rather than valuable historical records. More speculative ideas naturally extend further. Some writers imagine unknown medieval maps preserved in forgotten monastery vaults, hidden castle libraries, or private collections awaiting rediscovery. Others suggest that fragments of Viking geographical knowledge quietly influenced later European cartographers through undocumented channels. While convincing evidence for such theories remains absent, history has repeatedly demonstrated that remarkable manuscripts can emerge unexpectedly from overlooked archives. The greatest mystery may concern the individuals themselves. Who first translated the spoken accounts of Atlantic explorers into visual form? Were they monks patiently organizing sailors' memories into written descriptions? Royal clerks compiling reports for distant rulers? Anonymous navigators sketching coastlines from first-hand experience? Or ordinary seafarers whose names disappeared while their knowledge quietly passed into later traditions? Today, winds still sweep across the North Atlantic just as they did 1,000 years ago. The fjords remain. The currents continue their ancient rhythms, and the coastlines described in the old sagas still emerge through drifting fog. Somewhere within forgotten manuscript collections, neglected archive boxes, or overlooked marginal notes copied by careful medieval hands, fragments of those earliest geographical records may yet survive. Until they are found, the identities of the cartographers who first transformed the Vinland traditions into enduring memory remain hidden beyond the edge of the known map, reminding us that sometimes the greatest explorers are not those who crossed the sea, but those who quietly preserved its shape for generations yet to come. As the forgotten cartographers of the Vinland traditions remind us that anonymous hands can quietly shape history, another mystery carries us into the royal courts of medieval Scandinavia. Here, maps give way to crowns, and hidden coastlines are replaced by hidden ambitions. Once again, the missing pieces are not places or documents, but the truth behind a series of political rivalries whose endings remain frustratingly obscure. Snow settles across the stone towers of a northern castle overlooking the icy waters of the Baltic Sea. Torches flicker against thick fortress walls as armored guards patrol narrow battlements through the darkness. Inside the great hall, noblemen exchange cautious glances across long wooden tables covered with maps, treaties, and half-finished letters. Every conversation is measured. Every alliance feels temporary. Behind formal ceremonies and lavish banquets, whispers travel faster than official proclamations, and the fate of kingdoms may depend upon secrets spoken behind closed doors. At the center of this uneasy political landscape stood Eric of Pomerania, one of the most remarkable rulers of the early 15th century. Adopted by Queen Margaret I, Erik became King of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden under the Kalmar Union, an ambitious political arrangement intended to unite the Scandinavian kingdoms beneath a single crown. His reign promised stability, but governing three independent kingdoms with powerful regional nobility proved far more difficult than any royal ceremony could suggest. From the beginning, opposition surrounded his rule. Regional councils, influential noble families, wealthy merchants, and ambitious political rivals frequently challenged royal authority. Disagreements over taxation, trade policies, military campaigns, and the balance of power created an atmosphere in which loyalty could shift rapidly. Medieval courts were places where political fortunes changed with astonishing speed, and the line separating legitimate rivalry from deadly conspiracy was often difficult to identify. Several prominent opponents of Erik disappeared from the political stage under circumstances that later generations found difficult to explain completely. In many cases, historical records simply note that an influential noble died, was removed from office, or vanished from public affairs with little additional detail. Medieval chronicles, often written years after the events themselves, rarely provide the kind of evidence modern historians would hope to find. Instead, they preserve fragments, brief references, conflicting accounts, and occasional rumors that invite more questions than answers. One explanation is entirely ordinary. Life in the 15th century was uncertain, even for Europe's most powerful figures. Disease spread quickly through crowded courts. Infections that would now be treatable often proved fatal within days. Travel exposed nobles to harsh weather, accidents, and violence. A sudden death that appears suspicious today may simply reflect the realities of medieval life, where even kings could succumb unexpectedly to illness. Political exile also complicates the historical record. Opponents of Erik frequently lost positions of influence without necessarily losing their lives. Noble families, displaced by shifting alliances, sometimes withdrew to private estates or entered the service of neighboring rulers. When chroniclers paid greater attention to dramatic events than quiet retirements, later historians could mistake incomplete documentation for mysterious disappearance. Yet, the atmosphere of Erik's reign naturally encouraged speculation. The Kalmar Union was constantly threatened by internal division. Sweden, in particular, witnessed repeated conflicts between royal authority and local aristocratic factions. In such an environment, accusations of treachery, secret negotiations, and political intrigue became almost routine. Contemporary observers often suspected hidden motives even when direct evidence remained absent. Poison inevitably enters the discussion. Throughout medieval Europe, unexpected deaths among influential nobles frequently inspired rumors of deliberate poisoning. Such accusations were remarkably common, partly because poisoning left few obvious traces and offered an explanation whenever prominent figures died without visible injuries. However, modern historians approach these claims cautiously. Contemporary chronicles often repeated court gossip rather than verified facts, and almost no physical evidence survives to confirm such allegations. Another possibility involves the nature of medieval historical writing itself. Most surviving accounts were produced by clerics, royal officials, or chroniclers with their own political loyalties. Their priorities rarely included documenting every detail surrounding the deaths of regional nobles. Instead, they focused upon dynastic succession, military campaigns, diplomatic achievements, and religious events. Entire episodes of political conflict could therefore survive only as brief references scattered across unrelated documents. Some historians have wondered whether additional correspondence once existed. Royal letters, diplomatic reports, private family archives, and administrative records may have described disputes in far greater detail before later wars, fires, and centuries of archival loss claimed them. Scandinavia's medieval documentary record is substantial in many respects, yet countless manuscripts disappeared through changing political boundaries, accidental destruction, and simple neglect. More speculative theories portray Eric's court as the center of elaborate conspiracies involving assassinations, secret councils, and carefully orchestrated eliminations of political enemies. Such narratives have long appealed to popular imagination, but surviving evidence offers little firm support for organized campaigns of covert murder directed by the king himself. Medieval politics certainly involved intrigue, but distinguishing documented events from later legend remains exceptionally difficult. Perhaps the most enduring mystery lies not in dramatic conspiracies but in ordinary silence. Every missing letter, every incomplete chronicle, and every unexplained gap in the record allows uncertainty to expand. A noble whose death received only a single sentence in a medieval manuscript may once have stood at the center of political struggles that changed the future of entire kingdoms. Without the voices of those who witnessed these events, certainty remains beyond reach. Today, the castles of Denmark, Sweden, and the Baltic coast still overlook the same waters where royal ships once carried ambassadors, soldiers, and secret messages between rival courts. Their stone walls have endured long after the political arguments they sheltered faded into memory. Somewhere within overlooked family archives, forgotten monastery libraries, or uncatalogued bundles of medieval correspondence, new fragments of Eric of Pomerania's turbulent reign may still await discovery. Until they emerge, the mysterious deaths and disappearances surrounding his rivals remain suspended between documented history and enduring speculation, reminding us that the most revealing chapters of the past are often the ones history recorded only in whispers. As the uncertain fate of Eric of Pomerania's rivals reminds us that political struggles often leave behind more rumors than answers, another mystery leads us to one of medieval Europe's most decisive battlefields. This time, however, the unanswered questions are not about vanished nobles or forgotten letters. They concern sacred relics, ceremonial treasures, and symbols of faith that may have disappeared amid the chaos of a conflict that reshaped the balance of power across northern Europe. Morning fog clings to wide meadows where the grass moves gently beneath the wind. Scattered across the landscape lie weathered stones marking places where thousands of soldiers once fought beneath brightly colored banners. In the distance, the towers of brick castles still rise above forests that have reclaimed much of the countryside. Inside those fortresses, chapels once housed ornate reliquaries fashioned from silver and gold, jeweled processional crosses, illuminated manuscripts, ceremonial swords, and sacred objects carried into battle as visible reminders of divine protection. Many of those treasures are known only through inventories and scattered descriptions. Some survive in museums. Others simply disappear from the historical record. The Battle of Grunwald, fought on July 15, AD 1410, ranks among the most significant military engagements of medieval Europe. The combined forces of the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania confronted the Teutonic Order in a battle that ended in a devastating defeat for the Order. Thousands of knights, soldiers, and commanders perished, including Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen. The defeat permanently weakened the political and military dominance the Teutonic Order had exercised across the Baltic region. Yet, battles rarely end when the fighting stops. Behind every medieval army traveled wagons carrying supplies, administrative records, religious objects, portable wealth, and ceremonial equipment. The Teutonic Order was not simply a military force. It was also a powerful religious institution governing castles, monasteries, churches, and vast territories stretching across Prussia and neighboring regions. Its sacred possessions reflected centuries of donations from European rulers, noble families, and pilgrims who regarded the order as both defender of Christianity and sovereign authority. Historical records describe remarkable treasures. Inventories mention reliquaries containing fragments associated with revered saints, finely crafted altar furnishings, embroidered liturgical vestments, silver chalices, jeweled crosses, processional banners, richly illuminated service books, and ceremonial regalia used during important religious observances. Some objects carried immense monetary value, but their spiritual significance often exceeded their material worth. Relics represented continuity, legitimacy, and divine favor. Losing them could damage morale as profoundly as losing a fortress. The aftermath of Grunwald created ideal conditions for disappearance. Although the victorious armies achieved overwhelming success on the battlefield, they failed to capture Marienburg Castle immediately, allowing the Teutonic Order to regroup under new leadership. During the chaotic weeks following the battle, surviving officials attempted to secure strategic fortresses, reorganize defenses, and preserve whatever valuable possessions remained beyond enemy reach. In such confusion, transporting sacred treasures became an urgent priority. Some historians believe that many relics were successfully relocated. The order maintained an extensive network of castles connected by rivers, roads, and fortified settlements. Valuable religious objects may have been dispersed among secure locations, rather than concentrated within a single treasury. Such movements would have reduced the risk that one successful siege could eliminate the order's most treasured possessions. Over time, however, repeated wars and administrative changes may have obscured precisely where these objects ultimately went. Other relics may never have left the battlefield's shadow. Medieval armies often traveled with portable chapels and ceremonial equipment. Wagons overturned, supply trains scattered, and retreating forces abandoned valuable cargo while attempting to escape. Objects buried beneath hastily collapsed carts, concealed in nearby woodlands, or hidden for temporary safekeeping could easily remain unrecovered if those responsible never returned. Modern archaeological excavations around Grunwald have uncovered weapons, armor, coins, horse equipment, and personal belongings, demonstrating how much material evidence still rests beneath the soil. Yet, no discovery has revealed a lost ceremonial treasury. Attention has therefore shifted toward the Order's castles. Marienburg, now known as Malbork Castle, served as the headquarters of the Teutonic Order and one of the largest brick castles ever constructed. Within its fortified walls stood chapels, treasury rooms, archives, and secure storage chambers capable of protecting priceless objects. However, the castle endured repeated sieges, changing ownership, fires, reconstruction, and extensive wartime damage across subsequent centuries. Every major episode altered the survival of its collections. Some records indicate that certain relics remained safely preserved long after Grunwald. Others vanish from inventories without explanation. Historians occasionally encounter references to ceremonial objects described in earlier documents that never appear again in later records. Whether these disappearances reflect simple clerical omissions, deliberate concealment, wartime loss, theft, or destruction remains impossible to determine with certainty. The political transformations that followed further complicated matters. The Teutonic Order gradually lost territory while neighboring powers expanded their influence. Castles changed hands. Churches received donated objects from dissolved institutions. Precious metals were sometimes melted and refashioned to finance military campaigns or new religious commissions. A jeweled reliquary described in a medieval inventory might survive today only as anonymous silver incorporated into an entirely different work of art. Private collectors may also have played a role. Throughout medieval and early modern Europe, nobles occasionally acquired religious objects through inheritance, diplomatic gifts, purchase, or less transparent means. Once removed from official ecclesiastical inventories, such artifacts could disappear into family collections for generations before resurfacing, or vanish forever through sale, theft, or neglect. Local traditions preserve even more intriguing possibilities. Across northern Poland and the Baltic region, stories persist of Teutonic knights burying sacred treasures within forests before enemy forces arrived. Others speak of reliquaries concealed beneath monastery floors, hidden behind castle walls, or lowered into wells intended for later recovery. During times of crisis, such actions would not have been unprecedented. Throughout European history, clergy repeatedly concealed valuable religious objects during invasions, expecting to retrieve them once danger had passed. Archaeology has occasionally validated similar traditions elsewhere. Hidden church treasures have emerged unexpectedly from sealed crypts, abandoned monasteries, and forgotten wall cavities centuries after their concealment. Every such discovery demonstrates that emergency hiding places sometimes succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Those entrusted with the secret simply never returned. More speculative theories imagine far greater mysteries. Some suggest that especially revered relics associated with the Teutonic Order were intentionally removed to undisclosed monasteries far from the Baltic frontier. Others propose secret underground repositories beneath major castles designed specifically to safeguard sacred objects during wartime. While medieval fortresses certainly contained hidden storage spaces, no convincing archaeological evidence has confirmed vast concealed treasuries of the kind described in later folklore. The surviving written sources offer another puzzle. Inventories prepared before and after major conflicts rarely match perfectly. Medieval accounting practices were inconsistent. Terminology varied between scribes, and some descriptions remain frustratingly vague. A reference to the Great Silver Cross, or the relic chest of Saint, may identify an object impossible to trace because identical wording appears nowhere else. Historians are often left comparing scattered fragments rather than complete catalogs. The religious significance of these missing objects deepens the mystery. Unlike ordinary treasure, relics were not merely valuable possessions. They embodied the spiritual identity of the communities that preserved them. Their disappearance therefore represented more than financial loss. It erased physical connections that generations believed linked them to saints, miracles, and sacred history itself. As the missing relics of the Teutonic Order leave us searching beneath ruined castles and forgotten battlefields, another mystery draws us thousands of kilometers east, where sacred treasures may have vanished not during a single battle, but amid the gradual collapse of one of Southeast Asia's greatest kingdoms. Once again, the missing objects are more than precious artifacts. They represent faith, royal authority, and centuries of devotion whose final destination remains uncertain. The first light of dawn spreads across a vast plain where thousands of brick temples rise from the morning mist. Golden stupas catch the sunlight while weathered pagodas cast long shadows over dry grass and ancient pathways. Bells suspended beneath temple roofs sway gently in the warm breeze, producing soft echoes that drift across the Irrawaddy River. Within these sacred monuments once rested reliquaries fashioned from gold, crystal, silver, lacquer, and precious gemstones. Many were believed to contain revered Buddhist relics, royal offerings, sacred manuscripts, and ceremonial objects presented by kings seeking spiritual merit. Some remain where they were placed centuries ago. Others disappeared so completely that history no longer knows where they went. The kingdom of Pagan, also known as Bagan, flourished between the 9th and 13th centuries in what is now Myanmar. Under rulers such as King Anawrahta and his successors, the kingdom unified much of the region while embracing Theravada Buddhism as a central pillar of royal authority. The result was one of the world's most extraordinary sacred landscapes. Over several centuries, thousands of temples, monasteries, shrines, and stupas were constructed across the plains surrounding the royal capital, transforming Pagan into a remarkable center of religion, scholarship, and architecture. These monuments were never empty. Kings, queens, nobles, merchants, and pilgrims donated immense quantities of religious treasures to temples throughout the kingdom. Gold leaf covered sacred images. Jeweled ornaments adorned statues of the Buddha. Reliquaries containing revered objects were sealed inside stupas during elaborate dedication ceremonies. Palm leaf manuscripts copied by skilled monks preserved religious teachings, while ceremonial vessels and finely crafted offerings reflected both devotion and extraordinary artistic achievement. Many of these gifts were intended to remain untouched forever. According to Buddhist tradition, relic chambers were often sealed within the foundations or upper structures of stupas, hidden from public view as acts of enduring faith rather than public display. Their exact locations were sometimes known only to a small number of builders, monks, or royal officials responsible for the construction of the monument. Then the kingdom entered a period of profound uncertainty. Toward the end of the 13th century, Pagan's political authority weakened through internal challenges, economic strain, and external military pressure. Mongol campaigns reached the region during the reign of King Narathihappate, contributing to the gradual fragmentation of royal control. Although historians continue debating the precise role of the Mongol invasions in Pagan's decline, there is broad agreement that the centralized kingdom eventually dissolved, leaving many religious institutions without their former royal protection. What became of the kingdom's sacred treasures during this transition remains an enduring mystery. One explanation is that many relics never disappeared at all. Numerous temples survived the collapse of the kingdom and continued serving local religious communities for centuries. Monks carefully preserved important objects, while successive generations repaired damaged monuments and maintained Buddhist traditions. Archaeological excavations have uncovered reliquaries, inscriptions, sculptures, and ceremonial objects that confirm remarkable continuity despite political change. Yet, not every treasure can be accounted for. Historical inscriptions occasionally mention lavish donations, whose corresponding artifacts are no longer known. Some temples appear to have once contained elaborate furnishings that have vanished without clear documentation. Others display architectural features suggesting hidden chambers that remain unexplored or inaccessible due to conservation concerns. The landscape itself complicates the mystery. Pagan stretches across an enormous archaeological zone containing more than 2,000 surviving monuments, with many additional structures lost to time. Earthquakes have repeatedly struck the region, damaging temples and collapsing interior chambers. Floods, erosion, vegetation, and centuries of rebuilding have altered countless sites. A reliquary sealed within a damaged stupa could remain hidden beneath layers of fallen brick, entirely unknown to modern visitors. There is also the possibility of deliberate concealment. During periods of political instability, religious communities throughout Asia often removed sacred objects from vulnerable temples to protect them from looting or destruction. Monks may have transferred relics to remote monasteries, concealed them within lesser-known shrines, or buried them beneath temple floors until safer times returned. If those entrusted with the hiding places died before revealing their locations, the knowledge may have disappeared forever. Archaeology offers occasional glimpses into this hidden world. Carefully supervised excavations have revealed sealed reliquary chambers containing gold leaf, gemstones, miniature stupas, inscribed tablets, and devotional offerings exactly where medieval builders placed them centuries earlier. These discoveries demonstrate that untouched sacred deposits do survive beneath certain monuments. At the same time, they suggest that many more chambers may remain undiscovered within temples that have never been fully investigated. Local traditions preserve even richer possibilities. Stories passed through generations describe hidden royal relics concealed within inaccessible cave monasteries, buried beneath isolated stupas, or entrusted to forest monasteries beyond the reach of invading armies. Other legends speak of secret chambers accessible only through forgotten passageways known to a handful of monks. While such accounts belong primarily to folklore, they echo historical practices documented elsewhere, where sacred treasures were hidden during times of danger. Some of the most speculative theories imagine enormous temple vaults still lying undiscovered beneath the plains of Bagan, filled with royal offerings untouched since the kingdom's final days. Modern archaeological evidence does not support such dramatic claims, yet history repeatedly reminds us that remarkable discoveries continue to emerge from sites once believed fully understood. Every newly excavated chamber expands our understanding of the kingdom's religious life, while revealing how much still remains concealed. Perhaps the greatest mystery concerns not individual relics, but the countless ceremonies that accompanied them. Every hidden reliquary was placed with prayers, rituals, and hopes that future generations might never witness directly. Many of those moments survive only through inscriptions carved into stone, while the sacred objects themselves remain invisible behind ancient masonry. Today, the temples of Bagan continue to rise above the plains much as they have for nearly 1,000 years. Pilgrims still walk among the pagodas, monks continue their daily devotions, and archaeologists carefully uncover new fragments of the kingdom's remarkable past. Yet, beneath weathered stupas, behind sealed chambers, and within monuments that have never revealed all their secrets, the hidden relics of the kingdom of Pagan may still rest in silence. Whether they remain exactly where devoted hands placed them centuries ago or were quietly carried away during the kingdom's final years is a question that continues to linger beneath the golden skyline of one of Asia's greatest sacred landscapes. As the hidden relics of the kingdom of Pagan remind us that entire chapters of the past can remain sealed beneath stone and silence, our journey now crosses the globe to the cold shores of the North Atlantic. Here, the mystery is carried not by temples or royal treasuries but by scattered stories whispered along rugged coastlines. They speak of unfamiliar visitors, forgotten settlements, and people who may have disappeared long before one of history's most famous colonial enigmas unfolded farther south. Dense fog drifts across the rocky shores of Newfoundland as powerful waves crash against black cliffs carved by thousands of years of relentless tides. Stunted spruce trees bend beneath the wind, while seabirds circle over narrow coves hidden between jagged headlands. Fishing boats disappear into curtains of mist, only to reappear moments later, reminding every traveler how easily this coastline can conceal both ships and secrets. Along these remote shores, generations of sailors and local communities preserved stories of unfamiliar strangers who seemed to belong to another age, appearing briefly before fading once again into uncertainty. Long before the famous disappearance of the English settlers at Roanoke in AD 1590, Newfoundland had already become a crossroads of exploration. Indigenous peoples, including the Beothuk and other communities, had lived in the region for thousands of years. During the late 15th and early 16th centuries, European fishing fleets from England, France, Portugal, and the Basque region regularly crossed the Atlantic to harvest the extraordinarily rich cod fisheries surrounding the island. Their voyages produced countless reports, many practical and reliable, others shaped by rumor, misunderstanding, or imagination. Among these scattered traditions are occasional references to mysterious people or abandoned settlements that have inspired later speculation. Some early travelers described finding traces of previous visitors in unexpectedly remote locations. Others repeated stories heard from indigenous communities concerning unknown groups who had once occupied certain coastal areas before disappearing. These accounts are fragmentary, often second-hand, and rarely consistent. Yet, over time, they became woven into broader legends, suggesting that Newfoundland may have witnessed forgotten episodes of European contact long before permanent colonization. It is important to distinguish carefully between documented history and later interpretation. Archaeology has firmly established that Norse explorers reached Newfoundland around AD 1000, founding a short-lived settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows. This remarkable discovery confirmed that Europeans crossed the Atlantic nearly 5 centuries before Columbus. However, no convincing archaeological evidence currently demonstrates that substantial European colonies remained continuously in Newfoundland after the Norse departure, or that unidentified precursor settlements survived into the centuries immediately preceding English colonization. Even so, the legends persist. One explanation lies in the extraordinary complexity of oral tradition. Stories passed through generations often preserve genuine historical memories while gradually incorporating new events, unfamiliar cultures, and symbolic themes. An encounter with Basque fishermen in the 16th century might become intertwined with much older memories of Norse visitors. Distinct episodes, separated by centuries, could eventually merge into a single narrative that appears historically impossible but reflects the natural evolution of storytelling. The geography of Newfoundland encourages such mysteries. Its coastline stretches for thousands of kilometers, filled with isolated bays, hidden harbors, offshore islands, and dense forests. Temporary camps established by fishermen or explorers could vanish rapidly after abandonment. Wooden buildings decay quickly in harsh northern climates, while vegetation and erosion steadily erase traces of short-lived occupations. Entire seasonal settlements might disappear within surprisingly few generations if no permanent community remained to preserve them. Historical records also present significant limitations. Many of the earliest voyages to Newfoundland left only brief reports focused on navigation, fishing, or commercial opportunities rather than detailed ethnographic observations. Sailors often relied upon interpreters imperfectly familiar with local languages, increasing the likelihood of misunderstanding. Descriptions of unfamiliar people, abandoned camps, or strange artifacts sometimes entered written accounts stripped of the original cultural context that might have explained them. Some historians suggest that later writers unintentionally linked unrelated mysteries together. The disappearance of the Roanoke colony became one of North America's most enduring historical puzzles after its abandonment in the late 16th century. As interest in unexplained colonial disappearances grew, earlier reports from Newfoundland occasionally acquired new interpretations. Vague references to unknown visitors or vanished communities were retrospectively viewed through the lens of Roanoke, even though the two regions are separated by great distances and distinct historical circumstances. This process may explain why modern legends sometimes speak of Roanoke precursors. Rather than referring to an actual documented group connected to the lost colony, the phrase often reflects the broader idea that mysterious disappearances occurred elsewhere in northeastern North America before Roanoke entered history. It is a comparison born more from thematic similarity than from direct historical evidence. Yet, several unanswered questions remain. Could undocumented European fishing expeditions have established temporary camps whose existence escaped official records? Medieval and early modern fishermen frequently operated far beyond the oversight of governments. Seasonal settlements might have been occupied for years without producing extensive documentation, particularly if they served only commercial purposes. Others point toward indigenous oral traditions. Communities throughout Newfoundland preserved rich historical knowledge concerning migrations, encounters, and changing landscapes. Although many traditions were recorded only after centuries of cultural disruption, they occasionally describe unfamiliar visitors whose identities remain uncertain. Interpreting these accounts requires great caution, but they remind us that written European records represent only one perspective on the region's past. More speculative theories venture considerably further. Some propose forgotten Norse descendants living in isolation long after official Greenland settlements disappeared. Others imagine unidentified European expeditions reaching Newfoundland centuries before Columbus, but leaving no lasting trace. These ideas remain unsupported by convincing archaeological evidence, yet they continue to attract attention because the North Atlantic has repeatedly challenged long-held assumptions about early exploration. Archaeology continues to reshape the discussion. Every new excavation along Newfoundland's coast reveals additional evidence of indigenous life, seasonal fishing stations, or maritime activity. Advanced techniques such as remote sensing, environmental analysis, and underwater archaeology now allow researchers to investigate locations that earlier generations could scarcely examine. While no discoveries have confirmed the existence of mysterious precursor colonies beyond those already known, each field season expands our understanding of how many stories the landscape still conceals. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies in the countless journeys that were never recorded at all. Every fisherman blown off course, every explorer forced ashore by storms, every temporary shelter abandoned before winter, and every conversation between strangers speaking different languages represents a fragment of history that may never be fully reconstructed. Today, Newfoundland's cliffs continue to disappear into drifting fog just as they did centuries ago. Waves erase footprints almost as quickly as they appear, while abandoned coves remain silent except for the wind and sea. Somewhere along those rugged shores, beneath layers of soil, submerged beneath coastal waters, or preserved only within fading oral traditions, forgotten traces of early Atlantic encounters may still await discovery. Until stronger evidence emerges, the mysterious disappearance of the figures remembered in Newfoundland's legends remains suspended between documented history and enduring folklore, inviting us to wonder how many voyages reach these distant shores without ever finding a permanent place in history's written record.